Chapter 2090. Wei Zihong stared at the ball of light, his expression solemn. Shen Dong's actions had been prompted by him to beat the grass and startle the snake. That way, he would be able to force the enemy to attack ahead of time. Not only would that disrupt the enemy's plans, but it would also draw the attention of the enemies who were watching the mountain and sea realm from beyond the heavens. The various sects and clans had already prepared the battlefield, and were just waiting for the enemy to sneak in. Even if the enemy didn't show up, it wouldn't matter. Since the bag of light had already been set up, it could be used at any time. After Fang Luo finished thinking things over, he didn't hesitate any longer. His divine will entered an unknown area, and after a moment, two Taoists appeared in front of him. Fang Luo said, "Fellow Taoist Ying, fellow Taoist Chen, the cultivators here seem to have noticed something, so we can't wait any longer. Please take action immediately. I'll leave a restriction on the enemy behind me to help the two of you. I wonder if the two of you have a different opinion." Taoist Ying said, "Fellow Taoist, one in the open, one in the dark. Your arrangements are very appropriate." Taoist Chen asked, "Where is fellow Taoist Lian?" Fang Luo said, "Fellow Taoist Lian seems to have exposed himself. I don't know where he is right now, but considering his skills, he won't be easily captured by the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. He might even be able to tie down some of the mountain and sea realm's forces." Taoist Chen nodded. Seeing that the two of them had no objections, Fang Luo gave them a few more instructions, then retreated from the divine will and sent out a message. In that moment, the remaining cultivators on Heavenly Mountain all heard the same voice in their minds. "If anything happens, spread out immediately. Wait for an opportunity to kill the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Don't let any of the elites of the sects escape." When the cultivators heard this, they made their preparations. Their eyes darted around as they searched for suitable targets. At the same time, Taoist Chen appeared outside of Heavenly Mountain. His body was blurry, and it looked like a clone. As he flew up into the air, his face was expressionless as he tossed something down. When the item reached the ground, it glowed with spiritual light, transforming into a huge net that grew larger and larger until it covered all of Heavenly Mountain. This magic tool could not be used for defense or attack, but as long as it existed, no one would be able to move out of it. In order to ensure that the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm would be able to deal with it before they could react, he produced a jade disc, which was covered with a thin layer of glittering light that rippled like water. He flicked his pinky finger, causing a few drops of light to fall out. As soon as they touched the surface of the shield, they transformed into countless motes of light, which quickly spread out to form a layer of light between Heaven Peak and the shield. After he finished doing all of this, he seemed to be much more at ease, and he sat down cross-legged and paid no further attention to anything else. Somewhere in Tianyue Mountain, Taoist Ying retreated from the divine will with a cold glint in his eyes. He took out a spell, and the mana in his body instantly expanded, but at the same time, he felt a resistance. He revealed an expression of anticipation, and said, "As expected, you are prepared." However, he had no desire to give the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm a chance to fight him directly. Therefore, he produced a silver incense burner from his sleeve, placed it on the ground, and then poured some magic into it. After a while, smoke began to rise up from the incense burner, spreading out in all directions. Combined with his divine abilities, the incense burner could bypass all sorts of restrictive spells, and create all sorts of illusions in the minds of cultivators. If they couldn't overcome the illusions, then their minds would be destroyed, and they would become nothing more than puppets under his control. Moreover, resisting this thing didn't depend on one's cultivation, but the cultivator's state of mind. Logically speaking, even a mortal cultivator wouldn't be able to escape such a fate if they were contaminated by this aura and couldn't resist it. As the white mist grew larger and larger, the cultivators of the various sects and clans began to notice it. When they sensed that something was wrong, the fighting ceased. One of the Taoists leaped up into the air, sending a beam of spiritual light into the mist. A moment later, the beam of light returned. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and yet, the Taoist simply stood there, unmoving. A moment later, he dropped down from the sky, his life or death unknown. "There's something strange about this mist," someone shouted. "Everyone, get out of here." The disciples of the various sects and clans began to scatter back toward their own sect encampments. As for those who were closer to the mist, they weren't affected. Numerous spell formations opened up in front of them, allowing them to leave. Wei Zihong watched all of this from within the pavilion, and couldn't help but feel excited. He knew that the Taoists had been forced into action. After some calculations, he realized that it wasn't difficult to see how powerful the mist was. If no one tried to stop it, then it would only take 3 to 5 days for it to envelop all of Heaven Peak. Although Heaven Peak was currently enveloped by the mist, the turbid clear sky technique could teleport people to another location at any time, so there was no need to worry. The reason he hadn't ordered them to leave was because he still remembered that there was a strand of aura that he had yet to detect. Most likely, the Taoists still had eyes and ears hidden in the crowd, and would be able to report the situation to the people from beyond the heavens. Thus, the disciples of the various sects were left here as bait. Of course, these disciples were the outstanding talents of the mountains and seas, after all. He wouldn't really let them die here. If there was any real danger, he would send them away immediately. Now, it all depended on whether the people from beyond the heavens would come or not. As Lu Jipei was worried that there would be chaos, he would use his identity as the administrator to walk around the Shaoqing encampment from time to time. When he saw the huge mist rising in the distance, his reaction was faster than anyone else's, and he immediately hid in the encampment. At that moment, he saw the rolling white mist expanding outside, but he wasn't too worried. Since he was with the Shaoqing disciples, when they retreated, they would definitely bring him along. He secretly rejoiced that he had reacted quickly. At that moment, he saw a ray of spiritual light coming over. He recognized it as the sect's talisman, and casually took it. However, when he opened it, his expression stiffened. The talisman told him that all the administrators had already been teleported to a safe place, and asked him why he hadn't come. His expression turned ugly. From the looks of it, even if he didn't do anything, they would still be teleported to a safe place. Then why did he rush to the Shaoqing encampment with so much difficulty? Then, he comforted himself that the so-called safe place might not be safe. Even if he went there, he might not be able to avoid danger. It was safer for him to follow the Shaoqing disciples. However, the situation made him feel that something was wrong. As the thin mist approached, the Shaoqing disciples seemed to have no intention of leaving. He couldn't help but ask a Shaoqing disciple he was familiar with, "Fellow Taoist Gua, may I ask when your esteemed sect will leave this place?" The disciple with the surname Gua replied, "We have no intention of leaving." Lu Jipei's eyes widened, and the veins on his neck bulged. He anxiously asked, "Why not? How can we not leave?" The disciple with the surname Gua said matter-of-factly, "We, the Shaoqing disciples, never retreat when we encounter enemies." Lu Jipei suppressed his agitation and said softly, "I know that your esteemed disciples don't retreat when they encounter enemies. However, the mist outside is the work of an upper realm cultivator. Why do we have to fight them head-on?" The disciple with the surname Gua said seriously, "Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. This mist is also a great enemy of our generation. It's just that this time." He pointed at his heart. "The enemy is not outside, but inside." If he encountered a cultivator whose cultivation far surpassed his own, he would naturally not wait for death here. However, just now, the elder in the sect had already explained that the mist would not cause any harm to them. Instead, it would create many illusions in their hearts. If they could not pass it, their minds would immediately be destroyed, and they would die. However, if they wanted to pass it, their mental state would definitely be higher, so he decided to stay. After hearing the explanation, Lu Jipei just now understood the trick here. It was not strange that the Shaoqing disciples dared to do this, but he did not have the confidence to pass it. Despair immediately appeared on his face, and he regretted his previous actions greatly. The disciple with the surname Gua said plainly, "If you're not willing to stay here, there's a door at the back of the hall. It can send you to the encampment of our sect." It can temporarily protect you. When Lu Zhipei heard that, it was as if he had found a life-saving straw. He cupped his hands and quickly ran towards the back. On the other side, Li Hanxiao looked at the white mist gradually surging over and asked, "Fellow Taoist Jiang, I heard you say that I managed to avoid this calamity in the end?" Jiang Mingtang smiled bitterly. "Fellow Taoist Li, it's just that the scene I'm seeing right now is very different from the dream. I don't know if you'll be able to pass it safely." Li Hanxiao nodded and said, "I've heard Senior Granduncle Ran once say that the future is ever-changing and unpredictable." He gestured to the back. "There's a transfer formation in my pavilion that can only allow one person to pass through. Fellow Taoist can use it to leave this place." Jiang Mingtang was stunned. He seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time, he took a deep breath and said, "I'm willing to stay here." Li Hanxiao looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to do that. I don't intend to leave anyway." However, Jiang Mingtang shook his head and gritted his teeth. "In that dream, I only cultivated to the Yuanying realm, which means that my future will stop there. However, I'm not willing to give up. I might as well take this chance to see if I can break through the restrictions." He felt that even if he obtained all the opportunities in his dream, he would only improve slightly from before. He would still not be able to pass that crucial obstacle. Instead of that, he might as well take a gamble here. Li Hanxiao nodded. Since Jiang Mingtang made his own choice, he would not stop him. He sensed slightly and realized that none of his fellow disciples who returned to the remnant jade to fight had left. They all chose to stay and face this obstacle. He could not help but smile and sit down cross-legged, waiting quietly. After a long time, the mist spread and engulfed the entire Shaoqing encampment. In the encampment of Tianyue Ping Capital Sect Master Ni Tianping looked at the mist and sighed. "So the opportunity is here." He called out, "Elder Kai." Elder Kai bowed and said, "Please give me your orders, Sect Master." Ni Tianping said, "Retreat with the disciples and hide in the place we arranged beforehand. Remember, don't let Ping Capital Sect suffer any losses." Elder Kai looked up and asked, "What about Perfected Sect Master?" Ni Tianping said calmly, "I'll stay here." Elder Kai was shocked and said anxiously, "Perfected Sect Master, this..." Ni Tianping looked ahead and said, "Elder Kai, there's no need to say anything else. This is my opportunity. Once I pass this obstacle, I have a chance of severing my mortal body." Elder Kai became even more anxious. "But this is too dangerous. With Perfected Sect Master's cultivation, you'll be able to succeed even if you don't take this risk. On the other hand, if Ping Capital loses Perfected Sect Master, it'll be difficult for us to rise again." Ni Tianping shook his head and said, "Even if I die, there's still Elder Gu. He's also a genius, and Ping Capital Sect won't decline. If I cultivate according to the prescribed order, I might not be able to surpass him. This risk must be taken." Elder Kai wanted to persuade him again, but Ni Tianping had already made up his mind. There was nothing he could do. Seeing that the white mist was getting closer and closer, he could only retreat with the disciples first. Ni Tianping quietly watched the thin mist approach. He stood there without moving. In just a short while, his entire body was covered, and he could no longer be seen. Chapter 2091. Of the disciples who had come to participate in the battle, there were many who were staunch, and after learning about the use of the mist, many decided to stay behind. They weren't the only ones. Some of the upper realm cultivators at the gates of the realm made the same decision. As the mist spread out, quite a few people actually did get caught up in it. However, some of the weaker sects wouldn't allow their disciples to do such a thing. After all, it took them decades or even centuries to groom a single talented disciple, who was responsible for the prosperity of the sect. Of course, they didn't want to waste their talent here. The mist spread out quickly, and in less than half a day, it covered all of the surrounding platforms, as well as the main open areas. The peak of Heaven Peak looked like a vast expanse of white, but for the time being, it was impossible to penetrate it. When Daoist Ing saw what was happening, he sneered. The reason why his mist had such a tempering effect was because he had deliberately set it up so that the disciples would stay behind. If they passed the test, it would be possible to advance their cultivation base to the next level. Of course, even if only a few of the talented disciples managed to stay behind, the number of people who died in the mist would be even greater. That would be enough to achieve his goal. He didn't know when someone would come to stop him, so he didn't even look at what he had gained. After the two of them began to attack, Fang Luo took a divine ability and went into hiding. The divine ability didn't just stay in one place, but rather, spread out in many different areas, allowing his Dharma body to shuttle back and forth. That way, even within the enemy's hexing spell formation, it would be impossible to find his true location. Just now, he had been observing the reactions of the various sects and clans of the mountains and seas, and was surprised to find that they had responded promptly. Furthermore, as far as he could tell, other than those who had chosen to put themselves in danger, no one had died. Clearly, the sects and clans of the mountains and seas had come prepared. However, he hadn't seen anyone who was strong enough to do so. In fact, there wasn't even a single person who could sever the past and future bodies. That made him hesitate. Perhaps his earlier guess was correct. Although Mount Lianji was nowhere to be seen, many of the leaders of the various sects and clans of the mountains and seas had been tied down, and were now facing a dangerous situation. He couldn't help but feel a bit restless, and ponder whether or not he should make a move. However, he quickly suppressed the impulse. Now was not the time. Perhaps the mountain and sea realm was doing this on purpose to draw him out and take care of him. Therefore, he needed to wait a bit longer. It did not take long for another 3 days to go by. It would appear that the entire heavenly mountain was enveloped by the fog. Most of the restrictions outside had been broken. However, it would take some time for the fog to seep into the interior of Heavenly Mountain. After Wei Zihong moved the disciples to the depths of Tianyue Peak, he stood in the hall, constantly paying attention to the changes in the situation. He also remained motionless, allowing the other party to do whatever they wanted. His main goal was to show that the sects of the mountain and sea realm were powerless to resist, so that the people from beyond the heavens would come. However, there was still no movement, so the other party was probably still observing. He guessed that the reason why this person was so worried was because Fang Luo didn't show up, which made this person suspicious. Therefore, he needed to think of a way to force this person out. Ever since the events began, his aura has disappeared without a trace. Thankfully, there's still a way. He flicked his sleeve, causing a glowing sphere to appear next to him. This time, He Xianyin and the others were fighting Lian Jishan. With the help of the restrictive spell formation, the three of them were firmly suppressing Lian Jishan. If things went on like this, and nothing unexpected happened, then it would only take about 2 days for the result to be seen. He chuckled. That was just the right thing to do. He flicked his sleeve, causing the half-world to open up slightly, allowing more spiritual energy to enter. At the same time, he concealed the aura of the three of them, and then closed the door. At the same time, Fang Luo's expression flickered. Just now, although only a sliver of the aura had leaked out, Fang Luo could sense that Lian Jishan was fighting with someone else. However, the situation didn't look good, and it was hard to tell who his opponent was. Furthermore, he could sense that Lian Jishan wouldn't be able to hold out for much longer. If the mountain and sea realm cultivators waited until they finished dealing with him, then Fang Luo's chances would be even slimmer. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Fang Luo weighed the pros and cons. Without any further hesitation, he appeared above the heavenly peak, where he unleashed his aura. An incredible amount of magical power surged out, then crashed down onto the heavenly peak. Within the drum pillar, the person in the higher position suddenly opened his eyes and said, Fang Luo has made his move. However, Lian Jishan is still nowhere to be seen. It's hard to tell what's going on. The person in the higher position considered it for a moment. If he made a move now, it would seem that there was a great deal of risk involved. However, if he didn't make a move, then it was possible that he might miss out on the opportunity. He looked at the person in the higher position and said, "What do you think, fellow Taoist?" By this point, it wasn't just the people in the inner circle of the restrictive spells, but the people in the outer circle as well. The female Taoist in the higher position didn't immediately respond. After a long moment passed, she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, nothing in this world is completely foolproof. This time, there are variables, but there's no guarantee that they won't happen again. After all, the mountain and sea realm only has this much power. As long as the true Yang Yuan Zun doesn't interfere, then even if there are problems, given our skills, we should be able to overcome them. Furthermore, this is a great opportunity. If we give the mountain and sea realm enough time, then their cultivators will definitely advance even further." The person in the higher position immediately chimed in, "Fellow Taoist, you're right. The mountain and sea realm is flourishing with spiritual opportunity, and far surpasses us. If we don't find an opportunity to suppress their momentum, then it's hard to say what will happen in the future." The person in the higher position sighed and said, "From what I can tell, the mountain and sea realm not only surpasses us in spiritual opportunity, but also in their techniques. The two complement each other, and as time goes on, the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm will eventually become the righteous stream of heavenly Taoist magic. Unless our sects also have a powerful magical pool, then we will gradually weaken. The situation is truly worrying." In their realm, they weren't just looking at what was happening in front of them, but also tens of thousands of years, or even billions of years into the future. As the mountain and sea realm grew stronger, its Taoist cultivation techniques would gradually spread, and the other sects would eventually be at a disadvantage. In Taoist cultivation sects, the strong would grow stronger, and the weak would grow weaker. Furthermore, the mountain and sea realm had the true Yang Yuan Zun. It might not matter in the short term, but what about tens of thousands of years, or even billions of years into the future? As long as they didn't transcend, or if their sects didn't have such almighty experts, then they would eventually be suppressed. If their sects went downhill, then even if they were reincarnated, they wouldn't necessarily be as successful as they had been in their previous life. In fact, they might even get weaker and weaker. If their sect's Taoist teachings were severed, or if they were absorbed by another sect, then it would be impossible to return to the path of the Tao. Therefore, this wasn't just about the interests of the sects, but also personal interests. As far as they were concerned, the only way for the great sects to be on equal footing was for them to live in harmony. If they could grow stronger, then they would have to find a way to suppress them, in order to maintain a balance of power. Of course, that was impossible. However, the idea didn't just originate from themselves. There was also some other force behind them, which made them feel that if they didn't do something like that, then it would be extremely disadvantageous to them. "Since both of you fellow Taoists agree, then there's no need to wait any longer," said the female Taoist. "Let's make our move." Because everyone here was already prepared, as soon as she finished speaking, there was a flash of light on the stone rings. As they shattered, an object slowly rose from the ground. This object seemed to exist in the void, but then it gradually solidified. It looked like a big fish, with a row of eyes from its forehead to its spine. It was unusually fierce, and it had claws and webbed at the bottom of its abdomen. On its body, there were faint muscles, bones, and veins that only living creatures had. This thing was called Xiaoyu, and it was also a kind of void creature. It was ferocious, and it came and went alone. Unlike the big Kuan, which mostly lived in clans, it was best at devouring spiritual opportunity. As long as it had enough time, it wouldn't be difficult for it to devour the spiritual opportunity of an entire world. They chose this kind of void creature as their carrier. Their purpose was to attack the various sects of the mountain and sea, and at the same time, to devour the spiritual opportunity that was growing day by day. As this ferocious monster continued to rise, the spiritual opportunity in this small sky was continuously sucked into its body. The surrounding land and mountains began to collapse and sink, and the collapse spread in all directions. When he broke through the void space and fled into the void origin sea, this place had already become a dilapidated and deathly still region. In the half-world of the mountain and sea realm, the big Kuan Ingue waited quietly. Meng Zhida and Shen Baishuang of the Qinsang school, Ying Chuanxiu and Yu Shirong of the Shaoqing sect, Yuan Hongyang of the Netherworld Spring sect, and Xue Dingyuan of the Origin Mirage sect. The 6 of them stood on the back of the big Kuan, staring into the depths of the void. In the mountain and sea realm, all the cultivators who had severed their past and future bodies were here, except for sect leader Qin and sect leader Yu. All of a sudden, everyone felt something in their hearts. Ying Chuanxiu made some calculations and said, "The heavenly mysteries are moving, and evil is born. This person is here." Meng Zhida said in a low voice, "It's good that he's here. He didn't waste our time." The half-world they were in was where the barrier between heaven and earth was the weakest. As long as they broke into the world, they would definitely pass through this place. It wasn't impossible to go somewhere else, but they could sense it in advance, and wait there. Therefore, there was no way for the enemy to bypass this place. After all, this was their home ground, and they had the advantage. However, they didn't know how many Enlightenment Crossing cultivators they had, but they knew that they were far more powerful than the mountain and sea realms forces. Even if they could tangle with an Enlightenment Crossing Tribulation cultivator, fighting them head-on would be a bad idea. Therefore, they had no intention of fighting them head-on. Although the mountain and sea realm had the backing of the prime exalted Zhang Yan, he had also said that there were powerful enemies outside of the world. Therefore, the leaders of the great sects had never let their guard down. If one day an enemy attacked, and Zhang Yan was held back, then the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm could only rely on themselves. As a result, over the years, the various sects had not only prepared various escape routes in case of emergency, but they had also prepared various methods to deal with powerful enemies. It was just that no one had ever attacked them before, but this time, they could finally be used. Even as they spoke, everyone's hearts trembled as they sensed a tyrannical aura pushing its way into the half-world. At the same time, 10 more powerful auras appeared. Chapter 2092. Meng Zhida, Ying Chuanxiu, and the others looked over and saw a monster that looked like a large fish. The ferocious aura they sensed was coming from it. The sects of the mountain and sea realm had been traveling through the realms for years, so it was not difficult to recognize this monster. Their goal was clear. There were more than 10 cultivators on the monster's back. The 3 in the lead were shrouded in light. Their appearances were indistinguishable, and their cultivation bases could not be determined. However, based on their auras, they were undoubtedly cultivators of enlightenment. As for the 10 people behind them, 1 or 2 of them had similar cultivation bases, but most were far inferior. Without exception, they were all severing mortal bodies. The 6 of them glanced over. The most dangerous among them were the 3 cultivators of enlightenment. They were the only ones who could pose a threat to them. If the 3 of them were not present, it would not be difficult to deal with the remaining 10. This half-realm was very sturdy, and was covered with countless restrictive spells. It could be considered a barrier outside of the mountain and sea realm. Even without Bo Bai and Bo Xian, it could still kill most of the void creatures that tried to invade the realm. In fact, these 2 divine monarchs would only appear when facing the particularly fierce void creatures. As for the weaker ones, they would leave them to the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm to deal with. However, this obstacle was undoubtedly useless in the face of cultivator Du Ju. Meng Zhida said in a low voice, "The enemy has appeared. Everyone, let's act according to our previous plan." The other 5 divine monarchs bowed and said yes. Meng Zhida produced an item in his hand. As soon as it appeared, it seemed as if everything around it was swallowed up. Even as he held it in his hand, he could sense that there was something there, but he could not see it. This was Qinsang School's signature treasure, the Void Essence Arcane Cave. Facing 3 cultivators of enlightenment, they did not know how many tribulations they had achieved. Fighting them head-on was clearly unwise. Therefore, this time, they decided not to fight them head-on. Instead, they would use the sect's signature treasure to destroy them. You could say that this time, all of their plans revolved around this treasure. In the past, when he used this treasure to fight his enemies, due to the limitations of his cultivation, he was only able to break the 2nd layer of the seal at most. But now, because his cultivation was different, there was no longer such a limitation. At this moment, he had already broken the third layer of the seal. Once it was activated, it could turn an entire world into nothingness. Because the power of this treasure was so great that even its master might not be able to protect it, the person holding the treasure had to retreat in time before it was activated. Meng Zhen immediately created an avatar of magic power and let it hold the treasure of the sect. Then, he said to the great Kun Ingui, "Jinrening, please send us out of here." Ingui responded in a muffled voice. He waved his head and tail and immediately disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he had led everyone out of this half-world. When the female Taoist saw the 6 of them leaving, she assumed that the mountain and sea realm cultivators had realized that they were too powerful to fight back, and therefore didn't dare to fight back. She looked around and saw the avatar of the Jinren Ingui. Just now, however, she couldn't help but feel a sense of fear in her heart. She couldn't help but be shocked. Although she didn't know why, she was very confident in her own senses. She immediately used her divine will to transmit a message. "Hurry up and leave this place." However, even the cultivators of enlightenment couldn't leave this world in the blink of an eye. In the next moment, they felt as if they had been seized by some indescribable power. Everything around them, as well as the world around them, was frozen. Under the divine will of the female Taoist and the other 2 cultivators of enlightenment, whether it was their own bodies or the clear spiritual light around them, they all seemed to have transformed into the most beautiful of statues. They stood there motionlessly, and then, from the light to the corners of their clothes, they all shattered. The fragments turned into fine fragments, and then the fine fragments turned into nothingness, and then into complete darkness. By now, Meng Zhida and the other 5 Jinren Ingui had retreated into the mountain and sea realm. With a thought, the void essence arcane cave returned to his side. The sect guarding treasure could devour an entire world. With such power, as long as one couldn't escape to the outer realm, they would be trapped inside. No matter how one tried to move the root fruit, it would be useless. You could say that only the 3 cultivators of enlightenment could avoid such power. That was because if a cultivator survived a tribulation, then in addition to their Dharma body, they would also have another Dharma body in the realm beyond heaven. After a few tribulations, there would be a few more Dharma bodies, each more powerful than the last. Even if the Dharma body in the realm beyond heaven was destroyed, another Dharma body could descend. Thankfully, it wasn't like there weren't any weaknesses that could be exploited. Even if another Dharma body descended, it would still land in the same place. Although half of the realm was destroyed, it wouldn't be difficult to recreate it. However, because the realm was actually attached to the mountain and sea realm, there was a chance that the realm would descend into the mountain and sea realm. Therefore, there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Therefore, it was necessary to create many half-worlds, and the more half-worlds there were, the less likely it would be for the realm to invade. The 6 of them alone wouldn't be enough to accomplish such a task. Thankfully, they had made arrangements beforehand. Meng Zhida sensed that the auras of the invading enemies were temporarily gone. Then he said to Ingui, the great rock, "Taoist Ing, I'll have to trouble you again." Ngui's childish voice rang out in everyone's hearts. "Let me do it. Let me do it." It released its aura, which combined the auras of the 6 cultivators in the mountain and sea realm with the auras of the other mortal metamorphosis cultivators. When Meng Zhen saw this, he sent a message to everyone. In the Qinsang School's Duzhen Temple, the left temple lord Ning Chongxian stood with his hands clasped behind his back on a towering black rock. Countless auras swirled around him like a tempest, and countless tiny sword lights could be seen dancing within them. It was like a huge vortex, constantly drawing in the spiritual qi of the realm and then swallowing it up. No one knew where the spiritual qi went except for him. At this moment, he seemed to have sensed something, causing his thoughts to spin. In just an instant, all the violent vital energy was instantly calmed down and transformed into a gentle breeze and drizzle, causing everything in the heavens and the earth within the pocket dimension to become clear and bright. He looked up into the sky, and before long, a beam of light shot up into the sky. Wing Sky Continent, Clear Feathers Sect. In the Phoenix Cry Gorge, there were rainbows and flying bridges. Colorful lights shone brightly. The Clear Feathers sect master, Tao Zhenhong, was sitting on top of a heavenly feather mountain, giving a sermon. Around him, clear waterfalls flowed, and dense mist gathered in the sky to form a spirit cloud, like a canopy. Heavenly cranes circled around him, crying out. Below, in the dragon pool that led to the outer sea, dragon whales bobbed up and down in the water. Countless spirit birds perched on their broad bodies, and sometimes flew over them in groups. As his voice echoed in the clear sky, many mysterious sights appeared. The disciples sitting on the 2 cliffs listening to his sermon were all immersed in it. At this moment, he seemed to have sensed something. He nodded slightly and waved his horsetail whisk. A clear feather floated up and disappeared into the sky without a trace. On Ziying Continent's Shaowei Lake, Sect Master Yun Suan was strolling among the flowers. She seemed to be thinking about something. Suddenly, she sensed something and looked up. Has it begun? She casually pulled out a flower branch from the side and focused her attention on it. In an instant, a fragrance spread out and a fresh flower bloomed from it. She gently sent the flower into the sky and let it float away. In the heavenly mountain, Wei Zihong also received a message from Meng Zhen. He said, "This person has fallen into the trap. The time has come. It's time for us to do our part." He took a few steps forward and poured his magic power into the center of the restriction. After a short while, layers of the restriction's spiritual light appeared on the heavenly mountain. In a split second, the light membrane that was originally blocking the outside was broken. The mortal metamorphosis cultivators inside the heavenly mountain sensed this change and immediately sent their chi activity out through it. Almost at the same time, the mortal metamorphosis cultivators in the 4 realms of the mountains and seas began to react. Streams of magic power shot out into the heavenly mountain. Meng Zhida, Ying Chuanqiu, and the others sensed the auras, and then used their wills to open up a new realm around the gap between the mountain and sea realms. In the blink of an eye, these new realms were like bubbles floating on the surface of the mountain and sea realm, acting as a barrier. Even still, they couldn't sit back and relax. They were up against 3 enlightenment cultivators, and as long as one of them leaked some of their magic power into the mountain and sea realm, the 3rd person would be able to sneak in and pull the other 2 in. If things got to that point, they would suffer unimaginable losses. Therefore, they had to make up for that weakness. They absolutely could not afford to give their opponents even the slightest chance. Of course, unless they could predict their opponent's future, it would be very difficult to do that. However, if they wanted to see the future of their peers, they would have to pay a huge amount of divine will and magic power, and then they would have to find a way to destroy that future. Just now was the only chance they had. However, no one present could afford to pay such a price. Thankfully, there was no need for them to do such a thing. Ying Chuanqiu flicked his sleeve, causing the profound clarity sword to appear in front of him. The sword could reveal a sliver of the future, and considering the current level of his cultivation base, he didn't need to expend a lot of magic power to activate it. As soon as he sensed that the enemy's aura was about to descend into the mountain and sea realm, he could immediately sever it. However, after all of the preparations were made, no Dharma clone descended. Clearly, the enemy feared the Void Essence Arcane Cavern, and didn't dare to casually descend. However, they weren't in a hurry. If the enemy didn't send his Dharma clone down into the world, then he would be lost in the Mirage Realm, and would no longer be able to appear in front of anyone. In that case, it would be as good as killing him. Therefore, the longer they delayed, the better it would be for them. Back in the heaven beyond heaven, the female Taoist was shocked and enraged when she realized that her Dharma clone had been destroyed. Although she wasn't sure what it was, she was still terrified of it. She didn't know how many times the mountain and sea realm would be able to use this technique, and therefore, she didn't dare to rashly send her Dharma clone down. Therefore, she entered the indescribable realm and used her divine will to perform some calculations. However, even after expending a lot of magic power, there was no way she could completely resolve her current predicament. Perhaps sending her aura into the mountain and sea realm was one option. After all, the enemy couldn't possibly destroy his own personal cultivation realm. However, no matter how she thought about it, she came to the conclusion that even if there was a flaw in her plan, there was still a way for the enemy to plug it up. Although the magic power of a cultivator was higher than that of a cultivator at the third level of the mortal transformation realm, fundamentally speaking, he was still at the same level as the latter and had not transcended it. Although he could find a certain loophole, it was almost impossible to calculate everything. He could only rely on himself. Unfortunately, she couldn't stay here for too long. After all, there was still a chance. With a thought, she sent her Dharma clone down into the world. Chapter 2093. Ing Chuanxiu had been waiting in the realm, sword in hand. Just now, when the Taoist woman was about to make her move, he sensed something. He immediately used his sword to perform clairvoyance, and all traces of the aura appeared in his eyes. He immediately unleashed the Grand Clarity Sword, which he used to sever the strand of qi that might be able to infiltrate the mountain and sea realm in the future. That variable was now completely eliminated. At the same time, he used up quite a bit of his magical power. However, compared to using his own magical power to calculate an opponent's location, the difference was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Furthermore, he had the violet purity medicine to replenish himself, which ensured that not even the slightest bit of aura would leak out. Just now, the Taoist woman was in the realm beyond heaven. Although she could communicate with people of the same generation as her, she didn't know exactly what was going on in the world, and therefore couldn't make any accurate calculations. However, as soon as she landed, she felt as if she were missing something. She didn't have time to figure it out. She had already landed in the middle of a realm, and knew that she was still in the half-world. The only way to enter the mountain and sea realm was to break through that barrier. In order to avoid a repeat of the situation just now she knew that she couldn't stay in one place. Therefore, she decided to leave immediately. Of course, she had no idea that Meng Zhida, with the help of the great rocking Gui, had long since created clones to enter each of the realms. Therefore, it didn't matter where she landed, the result would be the same. Just now, just as she was about to break out of the realm, that terrifying feeling once again assaulted her. First, heaven and earth stopped moving, and then all living things began to shatter. Then, everything went dark. A moment later, her consciousness returned to the realm beyond heaven. This time, it was in her second tribulation Dharma body, which meant that her first tribulation Dharma body had been destroyed forever. The Taoist woman was incomparably shocked and angry, but also terrified. She had only transcended 2 tribulations, and now she only had 1 Dharma body left. If that Dharma body was destroyed, then she would be completely and utterly dead. She wasn't sure what magical items the people of the mountain and sea realm possessed, but when it came to such items, not even divine will would be able to do anything about them. Despite her vast reserves of magical power, she was powerless against them. At this moment, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he sent his Dharmakaya down again, he was afraid that he would suffer the same fate. But if he didn't go, he would undoubtedly get lost in the void realm and be unable to return to the world. After a moment of thought, she sent her divine will into the indescribable. Looking at the 2 Taoists, she said, "Fellow Taoists, just now, my Dharma clone was destroyed by the same technique used by the people of the mountain and sea realm. Based on my calculations, there were some unexpected variables in the workings of the heavens. Now that I think about it, it must be some sort of magical treasure that they are using. I underestimated them, and ended up implicating you too." "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to say such things," one of them said. "This attack on the mountains and seas was a joint decision made by the 3 of us. Only by working together can we overcome this crisis." The other Taoist said, "Fellow Taoist Shu, you're right. Getting out of this situation as quickly as possible is the right thing to do. Fellow Taoist, you've run into that thing twice now. Do you have any ideas on how to deal with it?" Even when they weren't bewitched by the strange will, they were still clear-headed. They knew that shifting the blame to each other wouldn't do them any good. Instead, it would be better to focus on how to deal with the problem at hand. Just now, the female Taoist said, I can sense that quite a few realms have been opened up to block my path. They want to prevent me from entering the mountain and sea realm. However, it doesn't matter what item they have, they can't possibly control every single one of those realms at the same time. Therefore, I need to go down with you too. That way, they won't be able to deal with all three of us at once. The two Taoists remained silent. They knew that even if the female Taoist's speculations were correct, as long as they went down into the world, one of them would be targeted by the enemy. However, they were all cultivators who had passed the Enlightenment tribulation. Their Dharma clones had been destroyed, leaving them with only one Dharma clone. If they were caught up in that thing, they would be destroyed in both body and soul. However, it seemed that if they went forward, they might be able to survive. If they stayed here, they would be doomed. Although they knew that, this was a matter of life and death, and the two of them couldn't come to a decision. The female Taoist continued, if even one of us manages to get into the mountain and sea realm, then the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm won't be able to use that thing again. Even now, one of them said, fellow Taoist, are you still thinking about dealing with the people of the mountain and sea realm? The female Taoist knew that they were already dispirited. Even if the three of them managed to break into the mountain and sea realm, they would still be thinking about how to leave, and not about fighting the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Of course not, she said. Presumably, all of you are the same as me. Before coming here, you left a strand of your soul in the Immortal's cave. We can make an agreement. No matter how many lives you go through, you have to help the fellow Taoist who hasn't escaped to be reincarnated, and protect him as he steps into the Tao. It doesn't matter how many lives he is reincarnated, you have to protect him until he severs his mortal body. The two of them thought about it for a moment, and decided that this was the best course of action. Without much hesitation, they agreed. After reaching an agreement, the three of them swore oaths. Then, after a short discussion, he sent the last Dharma body into the world. Back in the mountain and sea realm, Ing Chuanxiu's divine will had been focused on the profound clarity sword. Suddenly, however, his expression turned serious. This time, he saw 3 streams of aura entering the mountain and sea realm, which indicated that there would be 3 of them. He drew on his magic power, slashed out with his sword several times, and killed them all. He didn't stop there. He then used the sword to see where the other 3 Taoists had landed. Doing so consumed a lot of his energy, so he called out to the others, then sat down cross-legged and began to consume some medicinal pills to restore his magic power. A moment later, 3 beams of golden light descended from the sky, each heading toward a different realm. Because the hollow void abstruse cave could only sweep through one realm at a time, they could only deal with them one by one. The female Taoist was undoubtedly the most important, while the other 2 needed to be delayed. In such a situation, the 6 of them had already discussed a countermeasure in their divine will. After sensing where the other 2 Taoists had landed, Shen Baishuang, Yu Shirong, Yuan Hongyang, and Shui Dingyuan split up and headed toward the other 2 Taoists. It was at this moment that Meng Zhida's clone, which he had left in one of the realms, sensed the arrival of the female Taoist. With a thought, the hollow void abstruse cave appeared next to him, and in the next moment, the entire world was swallowed up by it until nothing was left. On the other side, one of the Taoists had just now appeared, and when he saw a beam of sword light slashing toward him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of danger. He could sense that if he was hit by that attack, he wouldn't be able to survive. Therefore, he didn't dare to hesitate for even a moment, and quickly turned around to avoid it. Originally, he could take a breather. However, the beam of sword light kept coming and going beside him. Not only that, but he also felt another aura faintly enveloping his body. In desperation, he risked exposing himself and kept moving in order to avoid it. However, in this way, he was forcefully dragged here. At a certain moment, he suddenly discovered that the aura of his 2 opponents had undergone a great change, as if they had suddenly fallen from their peak to their lowest point. It was clear that their real bodies were no longer here, and only their clones remained. He suddenly came to a realization and cursed inwardly. However, before he could retreat, the entire heavenly realm had been drawn in by an irresistible force, and then everything sank into darkness. After dealing with this person, Mengjin focused his consciousness on the last place where they were fighting. Then, he brought the hollow void abstruse cave over and said, "Fellow Taoists, you can retreat now." Yuan Hongyang and Xue Dingyuan immediately connected with the divine will of the Great Kun, and with the help of its magic power, they immediately teleported out. The last person in the battlefield, Daoist Yuhuan, had just landed his Dharma body when he fell into the mirage realm that Xue Dingyuan had created. Although it did not take long for him to see through it and rush out, he was then trapped by the water of the Netherworld Spring, and similarly, he was unable to rush out of this domain. After the two of them retreated, Meng Zhida guided his magic power and once again activated the abstruse cave. The entire heavenly realm collapsed without any suspense, and the Taoist was buried within it as well. His consciousness returned to his real body, and he said in a low voice, "The enemies who came to invade have all been killed, and only Lian Jishan and the others have not been eliminated. We need to end this quickly." Everyone deeply agreed with him. The six of them discussed for a while more. In order to prevent more enemies from attacking, Meng Zhida, Ing Chuanqiu, Yu Shirong, and Shen Baishuang decided to stay for the time being. They also asked Yuan Hongyang and Xue Dingyuan to go back and eliminate Lian Jishan and the others who were still causing trouble in the rear. Yuan Hongyang and Xue Dingyuan accepted the request and immediately went to the turbid azure sky. Under the siege of the three people and the restrictive formation, Lian Jishan's skyscraping palace had already collapsed, and even his resident Dharma body had been destroyed. At this moment, his first tribulation Dharma body was making its final struggle. He Xianyin and the others surrounded him very patiently, constantly using the restrictive formation to consume his magic power and divine will, not giving him any chance to fight desperately. At this moment, even if no one interfered, they would probably be able to deal with him within a day or two. When Yuan Hongyang and Xue Dingyuan arrived, they first greeted the three of them, then joined in the battle. At this moment, Lian Jishan's magic power far exceeded that of everyone present, but under the pressure of the restrictive formation, he could not use all his power to fight head-on, and his weakness was obvious. Now that there were two more people joining in, he immediately could not resist and could not help but move his root fruit again. He Xianyin and the others had already calculated the location of his root fruit. At this moment, when they saw him move again, they would not be polite to him. The three of them moved their magic power at the same time. Although they belonged to different sects, the source of their martial arts came from the great underworld grandmaster, so they were very compatible. Boundless tides appeared from the void and surrounded them from all directions. When they gathered in the middle, Lian Jishan was drowned. Xue Dingyuan could feel that the moment the tides of magic closed, this person's qi-ji no longer existed. Obviously, he had been killed by the three of them. He bowed and said, "Thank you, the three of you." Guo Zhuying said, "Not at all. There are still great enemies in your realm. Since we are here, we should finish what we started. We will wipe out this generation with you." Xue Dingyuan understood in his heart that the three of them were so proactive not only for the reason mentioned by the other party, but also because they wanted to let Fang Luo and the others escape. Then, they might resent them for spoiling their plans. So, they wanted to completely annihilate them. In this way, they would have no worries when they returned. He nodded and said, "Then I will have to trouble the three of you." Chapter 2094. When Fang Luo first appeared, he thought that with the three of them working together, it would not be difficult to get rid of the restrictions around Tianyu. Once they charged into the inner circle, the elite disciples of the various sects would be at their mercy. However, after he joined the attack, he found that it was not the case at all. The restrictions were abnormally strong, and there were layers upon layers. Breaking one layer after another, and there were clearly many mortal transformation realm cultivators supporting them with magic power. He was an enlightenment realm cultivator, and if he focused, he would be able to break through these obstacles in about 10 days. The problem was that he did not have that much time. Long before he made his move, he was sure that Lian Jishan would not be able to last more than a few days. When the mountain and sea realm cultivators returned after taking care of him, how would he have the chance to deal with Tianyu? He thought to himself, I was a bit too hasty in the end. However, he did not regret it, because he knew that if he continued to wait there and did not make a move, his fellow Taoists from beyond the sky would definitely continue to watch, and they might even be heading towards him now. His thoughts were not wrong, and his deductions were basically correct. The only miscalculation was that he did not foresee that the female Taoists group would not be able to invade the outer world, and that they would be defeated outside the outer world. Because he had always communicated with this person through Yanji Mountain, he knew nothing about this situation. However, he still felt a faint sense of unease, so he divined with his divine will, but found that the heavenly secrets were a complete mess, and he could not see anything. This made him feel even more uneasy. After thinking about it, he decided that he should first find a way out, so he split a portion of his magic power and left a clone in place, while he himself circulated his energy and hid to the side. If the situation was bad, he would immediately break through the outer world and escape. As long as he was in the void, no one would be able to stop him. He originally thought that it would be at least 1 or 2 days before he could see the results, but things developed beyond his expectations. After only half a day, the sky above the sky opened up, and 5 figures appeared. Then, several gazes passed over the clone and landed directly on him. Feng Luo's heart thumped. He immediately recognized He Xianyin and the other 2. For them to appear here, and from the outer world at that, it meant that something was wrong. Now that he was being watched by these people, it was impossible for him to break through the outer world. The 5 people slowly descended from the sky. When they arrived near Feng Luo, Xue Dingyuan walked out and cupped his fists to Feng Luo as he said, "Fellow Taoist, your outside reinforcements have been annihilated. Presently, only the 3 of you remain, and you're already unable to do anything. So just allow yourself to be captured." Luo hesitated for a moment. He wasn't afraid that they were trying to trick him, but rather, he was to them. Guo Juying sneered, "Fellow Taoists, why bother talking to this person? How can the 3 of them compete with us? Why don't we just capture them?" Just as Xue Dingyuan had thought, now that he had made his move, he wouldn't let the Yuhuan cultivators leave the mountain and sea realm. He knew that even if the 3 of them gave up fighting, the sects of the mountain and sea realm wouldn't let them off the hook so easily. However, wouldn't it be even better if he could kill them here and now? "Don't be impatient," Xue Dingyuan said. "Even if they surrender, we can guarantee that they will not be allowed to return to the multiverse heavens." Although they were in the clear sky, and had a magical item that had never been used before, with so many upper realm cultivators fighting, there was no guarantee that they would be completely safe. If they could capture them without shedding a single drop of blood, then they would be able to minimize their losses. Guo Ju won his guarantee, nodded his head, and didn't say anything else. Feng Luo's mind raced. Although he hadn't been able to personally kill a single cultivator from the mountain and sea realm, he was certain that many had died because of the fog. Among them were disciples from the great sects, and he didn't believe that the Taoist cultivators of the mountain and sea realm would let him off the hook. Furthermore, it wasn't as if he didn't have the right to negotiate. He looked up and said, "If you are willing to open the void realm and let us leave, then we won't stay here any longer. We'll even remove all of the traps we laid down. If you're not willing, then we'll have to settle things here and now." Xue Dingyuan shook his head. "Fellow Taoist Feng Luo, you have no chance of winning." Feng Luo pretended to be relaxed. "Even so, if we start fighting, I'm afraid that the mountain and sea realm won't be able to bear the losses." Xue Dingyuan said coolly, "I've said all I can. If you're not willing, then we'll just have to rely on our own methods." Feng Luo stared in shock. He had never imagined that the mountain and sea realm would be so determined. He had assumed that he would be able to negotiate some conditions, but now it seemed that was impossible. Yuan Hongyang realized that he couldn't use words to persuade his opponent, so he waved his sleeve, causing a rumbling sound to echo out as a dim yellow river flowed around him. As soon as it appeared, everything in the world seemed to become obscure and sluggish. As soon as Feng Luo saw the water, he felt a wave of dizziness surging into his mind. His mind and consciousness gradually became blurry. It would not take long before he would fall into a state of unconsciousness. Fortunately, he had a lot of battle experience. He immediately moved his roots and fruits and got out of this state. He then released his magic power in time to block the water that was already crashing down on him. At the same time, he called for Ying and Chen to come and help him. At the same time, Wei Zihong, who was in the pavilion, felt the entire Tianyue tremble. Following which, the commotion grew louder and louder. The pavilion he was standing on shook incessantly as if it would collapse at any moment. He knew that the two sides were fighting. However, he maintained his calm. The Heavenly Peak Hexing Spell Formation's spell cores were under the control of the true paragons. As long as the spell cores weren't completely destroyed, there was nothing to worry about. Furthermore, because the outer layer of the Heavenly Peak Hexing Spell Formation was surrounded by the true paragons, all of the shockwaves of magic power could be transmitted into the inner layer of the Heavenly Peak Hexing Spell Formation. Furthermore, there was no need to completely seal off the power of the collision, only weaken it. Even if some of it leaked out, the mountain and sea realms' restrictive spells, which had been in place for thousands of years, should be able to withstand it. 2 days later, he sensed that the surging spiritual energy had calmed down. Stepping outside, he clasped his hands behind his back and looked up into the sky. "It's over," he said. Back in the half-world of the mountain and sea realm, Meng Zhida clasped hands and bowed to Yi Xianyin and the others. "Many thanks for your help," he said. Guo Zhuying laughed. "Fellow Taoist Meng, you flatter us. How could we not lend a hand when a fellow disciple is in trouble? Besides, your sect possesses the legacy of the patriarch. Even without us, it would have been difficult for this generation to shake the mountain and sea realm." Taoist Tongguang shook his head. "I really don't know where this obsession of his comes from, but why would he insist on making things difficult for the mountain and sea realm?" Meng Zhida said in a low voice, "The spiritual energy of the myriad worlds in the heavens has flourished, and the workings of the heavens have been thrown into chaos. It is hard for many people to avoid having wild thoughts. In the future, such things will not disappear." Guo Zhuying nodded. Clasping his hands again, he said, "Although the enemy has retreated, I presume your sect still has many matters to attend to. We won't disturb you any longer." Meng Zhida said, "That's fine. It's not convenient for us to entertain guests right now. We'll pay you a visit another day to express our gratitude." After exchanging some pleasantries, Yi Xianyin and the others broke through the world and left. Meng Zhen looked behind him. Although the enemy had been eliminated, the mountain and sea realm had paid a price as well. Each of the realms that had been created had been borrowed from the mountain and sea realm. When the Void Essence Arcane Cavern was used, the entire realm would be transformed into nothingness. In other words, the entire realm would be completely wiped out, and as such, the heavenly realm itself would be damaged. Of course, this was still better than fighting in the mountain and sea realm. Furthermore, Sect Leader Qin and Sect Leader Yu were both currently attempting to break through to the True Yang stage. As long as one of them succeeded, it would not be difficult to make up for the losses they had suffered. Up above Heavenly Peak, the mist had dissipated, and numerous cultivators could be seen sitting cross-legged. However, most of them had already ceased breathing. When the elders of the various sects saw what was happening, they began to search for their disciples who were still stuck in the mist. However, the results were quite pitiful. Although it wasn't as if no one had managed to break through, the number of people who had been able to do so were few and far between. The disciples who had originally intended to use the mist to temper themselves, but had been stopped by the elders, were secretly glad that the mental barrier was far more powerful than they had imagined. Back in the Shaoqing sect's encampment, Li Hanshao suddenly opened his eyes. However, his spirit and aura were completely different than they had just now, as if he had shed off a layer of old clothing. At this time, he turned his head and looked at a figure sitting cross-legged there. "Fellow Taoist Jiang." Jiang Mingtang did not reply. He simply sat there motionlessly, no longer breathing. Li Hanshao sighed softly. He sensed that there were quite a few Shaoqing disciples who had come to participate in the sword duel, but only half of them were still alive. The Shaoqing sect had very few disciples to begin with, and there were quite a few who had come to participate in the sword duel. Furthermore, they were all outstanding disciples of the sect. Such a loss could not be said to be small, but those who had managed to survive, including him, would undoubtedly be able to achieve even greater things in the future. Lu Zhipei walked out of the Shaoqing sect's encampment, still in a state of shock. He had successfully survived. He had originally wanted to thank the Shaoqing disciple surnamed Gua, and at the same time, maintain a friendly relationship with him. However, he did not see him. He asked around, but was shocked to discover that this person did not manage to pass the trial in the end. His vitality had already been exhausted in the mist. However, in his memory, this person had passed the trial in the end. For a moment, many doubts arose in his heart. He clearly remembered that this person would achieve great things in the future. When he thought of this, he could not help but doubt whether what he had seen was real. However, when he thought about it again, if what he knew was only an illusion, then it was impossible for him to know this person's name out of thin air. Perhaps it was a false rumor spread by the later generations, or perhaps he had borrowed his original name after reincarnating. After all, he had only heard rumors from others, and had never really seen this person. When he thought of this, he could not help but calm down. Then, he faintly felt a little excited. This crisis had already passed. Next, he would be free to soar in the vast sky and swim in the vast sea. Chapter 2095. In the depths of the void, Bai Wei and Deng Zhang saw the destruction of the female Taoists group. Deng Zhang said coldly, "This generation can't accomplish anything in the end. It's a waste of our help." Bai smiled, "Even if they can't, they'll still cause the people of human path to kill each other. We won't suffer any losses." Deng Zhang was expressionless. Although he was also a human cultivator, ever since he walked on the heartless path, he didn't care about these things anymore. Bai Wei sighed, "Compared to Taoist Zhang, Dan Yi, and Fu Qingming, we can only do these little things and wait for the time to change." He thought that the fate of human path was too strong now. In this era, it was almost impossible to win. Even if the two of them joined the battle, they would only be throwing their lives away. So they might as well take advantage of the chaos in the heavenly secrets to incite a fight among human path and weaken the power of human path as much as possible before the next era. This time, he was most afraid that such little things would attract Zhang Yan's attention, so he had been very careful. At most, he only used his mana to hide from Bo Bai and Bo Xian's senses. He pondered for a while. This time, Zhang Yan, Fu Qingming, and the others didn't make a move. Obviously, this hadn't reached the bottom line of their tolerance. So next time, as long as they didn't cross the line, they should be fine. On Heaven Peak, Elder Kai hurriedly came out of his hiding place. Using the formation door, he quickly came to the place where he parted with Nitianping a few days ago. He looked up at the high platform and saw Nitianping still standing there, but there seemed to be no aura on him. He couldn't help but be shocked. When he got close, he bowed and said softly, "Sect Master, Spiritual Master." However, after waiting for a while, Nitianping didn't respond. His expression changed slightly, and he took a few steps forward and said with a heavier tone, "Sect Master, Spiritual Master." When he saw Nitianping still standing there motionlessly, his heart sank, and he seemed to have made some sort of decision. He said, "Sorry for offending you." He took a few steps forward and placed his hand on Nitianping's back. However, he never expected that with just a light touch, Nitianping's body would dissipate like a speck of dust. Elder Kai was shocked and retreated 2 steps. At this time, a voice sounded in his ears, "Elder Kai." Elder Kai turned around and saw Nitianping standing there, smiling at him. He was stunned for a moment and then became excited. "Sect Master. Just now, that's..." Nitianping said, "Just now what you are seeing is my old body." When Elder Kai heard this, he was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted. His face was filled with joy, and he said with a trembling voice, "Sect Master has found his old body, does that mean?" Tianping nodded and said, "Once the mortal body is gone, the roots and fruits are obtained. I have to thank fellow Taoist Yu Huan this time. Otherwise, if I wanted to enter this realm, I would have to cultivate for hundreds of years." Elder Kai was overjoyed when he got a clear answer. He bowed and said, "Congratulations on your success, Sect Master." Now that his sect master had shed his mortal body, Pingdu's sect finally had someone who could hold up the heavens, and the sect was worthy of its title as a large sect. In particular, there was originally a conflict between the new and the conservative factions in the sect. Now that the sect master had such a cultivation base, there was no need for them to continue fighting with the conservative faction. In the face of absolute power and righteousness, no one would be able to resist, and the sect finally did not have to continue on the old path. Although Elder Ge's talent was extremely high, and he might have such achievements in the future, no one knew how long it would take for that to happen. During this period of time, Tianping had already sorted out the sect from top to bottom. It was impossible for Elder Ge to make a comeback. He thought for a moment and said, "Now that the sect master has succeeded, should we inform the other sect masters?" Tianping waved his hand and said, "There's no need to do this for now. I've been out for a long time, so it's time to go back." Elder Kai immediately understood that the sect master did not want to borrow the power of the other sects this time, and wanted to directly solve the internal problems of the sect with his own strength. He said seriously, "Yes, I'll go back and gather the disciples now." Tianping shook his head and said, "This time, I'll go back alone. Elder Kai, it's better for you to stay here with the disciples of the sect. The tournament is not over yet, and it's rare for Pingdu sect's disciples to have a chance to compete with the disciples of the other sections. Why should we take away their opportunity?" Although the Tianyue Peak had experienced such an attack, in reality, not a single person had actually died in the attack. Thus, the upper echelons of the various sects did not stop the battle because of this. The battle would still continue. Elder Kai bowed and said seriously, "Yes, I will definitely take good care of the disciples." Tianping nodded and left a shadow clone here. With a thought, he disappeared without a trace. After Yuan Hongyang and Xue Dingyuan dealt with Fang Luo and the others with He Xianyin and the others, because they were not sure if there were any more enemies coming, they returned to the half-realm to stand guard. The 6 of them had been standing guard here for a day or two, when they suddenly heard 2 dull sounds in their minds. It was the 2 divine monarchs, Bo Bai and Bo Xian, connecting with their divine wills again. Their appearance undoubtedly meant that the enemy had retreated. Meng Jida's divine will rose and asked a few questions, but the 2 of them said that they had fallen into a deep sleep for no reason. They didn't know what was going on, but they guessed that a true Yang expert must have done something behind the scenes. However, there was no need to worry about that. With Zhang Yan, the prime Dao ancestor, there was no way the sects of the mountain and sea realm could not handle an almighty expert. He would not sit idly by, and perhaps things would not have reached such a state. Since the 2 divine monarchs were present, there was no need to keep too many people here. After some discussion, the 6 of them decided that each of them would stand guard here for 300 years. In the future, if there were people who had severed their past and future bodies, they would have to stand guard here as well. Although the matter was in the past, the aftermath was far from over. It wasn't just the sects of the mountain and sea realm who had participated in the tournament. There were also cultivators from beyond the heavens. It had been a very intense battle, and had involved many upper realm cultivators. Naturally, there was no way to cover it up. Furthermore, the sects of the mountain and sea realm had no intention of concealing it, so it didn't take long for the entire heavens to learn of it. When the cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens heard about it, they were especially shocked. From their point of view, although the mountain and sea realm had a true Yang cultivator, Yuan Zun, it did not have a single enlightenment crossing cultivator. Therefore, they assumed that without Yuan Zun, the mountain and sea realm would not be able to stand up to any of the other heavens. However, the battle prowess displayed by the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had exceeded all expectations, and they had no choice but to take it seriously. It must be said that in addition to the 6 Enlightenment Crossing cultivators, there were also more than 10 mortal metamorphosis cultivators. That was an incredibly powerful force. You could say that among the 19 heavens of the Yuhuan heavens, there were only a few who could truly stand up to such a powerful force. If Yuan Zun had not intervened in the invasion of the mountain and sea realm, then there would have been no suspense. In the end, the invaders had been completely wiped out. Not a single person had been able to escape. On the other hand, it was said that not a single person from the mountain and sea realm had been injured in the battle. In the Green Flower Heaven, in the main hall of the Green Jade Palace, Elder Peng sat in the seat of honor. Below him sat Guan Longzhao and Feng Lan. After a moment of thought, Elder Peng said, "Many of the cultivators who attacked the mountain and sea realm were from the Yuhuan heavens. The Green Jade Palace will send an emissary to apologize to the fellow Taoists of the mountain and sea realm." The various heavens of the Yuhuan heavens were not subordinate to each other, and the Green Jade Palace could ignore them as long as they practiced the karmic merit technique. However, nominally, the Green Jade Palace was still the leader of the heavens. Therefore, although this matter had nothing to do with the Yuhuan heavens, since all of the invaders were cultivators of the Yuhuan heavens, they still had to apologize. That way, both sides would not lose face. Feng Lan said, "In a moment, I will personally make a trip to the mountain and sea realm." Elder Peng nodded, then looked at Guan Longzhao and said, "Elder Guan, have you investigated the identity of this person?" Guan Longzhao produced a jade disc from his sleeve and said, "This person's name, background, and history are all recorded in this disc." Elder Peng took the disc and looked it over. He couldn't help but frown. This person came from different heavens, and even different sections. Some of them were even from the evil sects. From their past actions, it seemed that they did not have any relationship with each other. The fact that they had joined forces to fight the enemy was truly puzzling. However, when he thought about how this person dared to attack a realm that was overseen by the true Yang Yuan Zun, he realized that they must have had the support of Yuan Zun. If that was the case, then everything made sense. Only the true Yang Yuan Zun could gather so many people from different sections. He thought about it for a moment, then put the jade disc away and said, "How is the investigation going?" Guan Longzhao's expression was solemn as he said, "Recently, 2 more disciples claimed to have seen changes in the future. One of them said that he could see 1,000 years into the future, and the other was the same as the rogue cultivator who was detained. He said that he was the reincarnation of an upper realm cultivator. As the heavenly mysteries become chaotic, I suspect that more and more people like him will appear." Feng Lan chuckled and said, "And that's only what we discovered. Who knows how many others have clearly seen a lot, but are keeping it a secret." Elder Peng snorted and said in a low voice, "Pass down my orders. Have all the heavens stationed in the heavens keep a close eye on the heaven masters. If there are any strange movements, report it immediately." Whether or not the people who had attacked the mountain and sea realm had been disturbed by the heavenly mysteries was still to be determined. However, if even the Enlightenment Crossing cultivator had been affected, then it was hard to say whether or not there were heaven masters in the myriad heavens who had been bewitched. If something unforeseen happened to the heaven master of a realm, then the method of obtaining karma points within the realm would be greatly affected. That was something they absolutely could not allow. Zhang Yan sat in Qinghuan Palace. The situation in the mountain and sea realm, the changes in the hearts of the various sects in the myriad heavens, and even the words and actions of Bai Wei, Deng Zhang, and the others. All of that was clearly visible to him. This time, he had allowed the 2 of them to do as they pleased. He had not interfered because he wanted to use them to stir up karma. Because the various sects in the myriad heavens had established a foothold in the Kunshi continent, and had frequent dealings with the main sect, it could be said that the karma of the profound stone had already been incorporated into the myriad heavens. Of course, in the end, the modern world was just the modern world. It was merely a place in the Bushu heaven. Therefore, if the profound stone appeared, it would only appear in the Kunshi continent, and not anywhere else. He secretly calculated that the profound stone was already showing signs of entering the world. However, it would still take some time before it would actually appear. However, The various changes in the modern world were still a small matter to him. He looked up into the depths of the void. As he had been constantly calculating, he now had a vague idea of the source of the disturbance in the myriad heavens. Chapter 2096. When Zhang Yan sensed the source, he found that its aura was strange and obscure. He couldn't even tell if it was a person or a connate treasure spirit. If he wanted to see it clearly, he had to either continue to calculate, or go directly to the source. He thought about it for a moment, but decided against it. When he came into contact with the aura, he found that there was no malice in it, nor was there any specific bias. This meant that the other party wasn't coming for him. But if he took the initiative to go forward, he might end up in conflict with the other party. Before he knew what the other party's goal was, he didn't plan to interfere. Although the fluctuations of magic had directly caused the world's spiritium to flourish, it didn't go against his wishes. In fact, he was happy to see it. But that didn't mean he would let down his guard. The other party was helping the world's spiritium, but who knew what would happen in the future? Fortunately, he had a rough idea of where the source was, so he just needed to be careful. If the other party did anything harmful to Bushutian, he could deal with it at any time. He looked away and didn't think too much about it. Instead, he entered a meditative state and continued to circulate his energy to comprehend the mysteries of the Great Tao. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. The competition in the mountain and sea realm was still going on. Not only had the previous battle not caused any adverse effects, it had even attracted more disciples from the sects beyond the heavens to participate in the competition. The scope of the competition was growing larger and larger, and it seemed that it wouldn't end for several years. But the chaos of the heavenly mysteries didn't stop. Because it was suspected that the female Daoists group had been influenced by the heavenly mysteries to attack the world where Yuan Zun was in charge, the various sects in the heavens now took measures to keep an eye on people who had obtained the heavenly mysteries and karmic luck, lest they come out and cause trouble. Among them, it wasn't that there weren't any upper realm cultivators who were disturbed by this and had strange thoughts in their hearts. However, in a situation where there weren't any upper realm experts to push them, this generation's mind was still relatively clear. At the very least, they were able to endure and not move. As a result, in these past few years, the overall situation could be considered stable. Although Zhang Yan was in secluded meditation in the great Qinghuan heaven, he could see what these people were thinking. But as long as they weren't almighty true yang cultivators, he wouldn't pay much attention to them. On this day, as he was cultivating, he suddenly sensed something. He looked up and saw a jade talisman floating in the air. It was obviously a magical manifestation of an old acquaintance. With a thought, he summoned the item and it landed in front of him. After observing it for a moment, he understood what it was. This item was sent by ancestor Yao Han. He said that he had been entrusted by the Mirror Lake Lord to invite him there for a meeting, saying that he had an important matter to discuss with him. Zhang Yan thought about it for a moment. Before Patriarch Yao Han left, he had asked him to go, and he had the intention of exploring that place. However, he had been busy cultivating, so he hadn't been able to make a move. Now that the Patriarch had sent him a letter, he could make a trip there. However, he guessed that the so-called big event might have something to do with the spiritium of all realms. As for the reason why the Patriarch invited him to the land of protection, he had to be wary of it. If he was the master of Busu Tian, he could suppress any outsider at any time. The person behind ancestor Yao Han was also the master of the land of creation, so it wouldn't be difficult for him to do so in his own world. Therefore, he wouldn't use his real body this time. He would only send an avatar. In this way, he would only have to worry about the other party. Because if he went there, if he had any brilliant methods, he could very well leave a strand of qi at the other party's place. In this way, if the two sides were to fight in the future, it would definitely be of some use. However, since he was invited here today, he would naturally not do such a thing. After thinking for a while, he created an avatar and came out of Busu Tian. Last time, when he was looking for the broken mask, he had sensed the location of the Mirror Lake, so it wasn't difficult to go there. However, as a guest, he didn't have to do so this time. He took out the jade talisman and threw it out. In an instant, a wave of chi opened up the path ahead. He waved his sleeve and moved forward. In an instant, he arrived in front of the mirror lake. The master of this place sensed his arrival. There was a ripple on the surface of the mirror lake, and Patriarch Yahan walked out. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan also lifted his hand to return the greeting. He glanced at the other party. As his cultivation improved, he could also sense that there was something unusual about the other party. From the words of the Taoist holding the sword, he could infer that this Patriarch Yahan might not be the Patriarch himself. Perhaps he was just connected to the Patriarch, or perhaps he was just a part of the Patriarch's true body. This person didn't do this just for his own cultivation, but for another purpose. Patriarch Yahan stepped aside and said politely, "Fellow Taoist, please." Zhang Yan nodded and followed him into the mirror lake. He felt as if he was submerged in a pool of warm water, and his senses were blurry. After what seemed like a long time, this strange feeling disappeared just now. He guessed that this was a barrier that the other party purposely set up so that he couldn't sense the truth of this place. As his senses gradually recovered, he knew that he was in the middle of the world. He looked around and found that this place was very different from other places of fortune. If he wasn't wrong, this place should have been created by the fusion of a supreme treasure of fortune and the essence of fortune. This supreme treasure of fortune and this place of fortune came from the same source. Being able to reach this step meant that one could transcend. However, for some reason, he ended up in this situation. Patriarch Yahan had hinted that this place was no weaker than Bushutian, but that was an exaggeration. However, this place had a good foundation. Among all the places of fortune he had seen, aside from Bushutian, there was no other place that could compare to this place. Moreover, because it was fused with a supreme treasure, the door was sturdy enough. Not long after, the two of them arrived before a platform. On the main seat sat a Taoist wearing half a mask. However, the eyes on one side of the mask were lively, and the mouth and nose on the other side were stiff. Most of the people sitting below him were people he knew. On the left were Yu Qiu and Yu Lu, and there was an empty seat above them. That was the seat of ancestor Yao Han. Opposite them were Skysplit, Profound Che, and Ren Du, who had come to seek refuge. When the Taoist saw him, he slowly stood up from his seat. The other five also stood up together. Patriarch Yao Han chuckled and pointed at the Taoist. "Fellow Taoist Zhang, this is the master of Mirror Lake. We were only able to avoid being devoured by that thing because of his protection." The Taoist bowed to him and said, "This humble Taoist is Ji Zhuang." "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and raised his hand to return the greeting. "So it's fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang. Greetings." Standing in front of this person, it was not difficult for him to tell that the faceless Taoist who tried to stop him was a manifestation of this person's aura. Of course, an avatar of aura was not the same as the true body, but it still represented the will of the true body. However, he was here as a guest today. Even if there were any conflicts, they could be discussed later. Patriarch Yahan said, "I believe the rest of you know each other, so I won't say anything more." Jizhuang Daoren waved his sleeve. "Fellow Taoist, please take a seat." Zhang Yan nodded and sat down on the guest seat. The others also returned to their seats. Jizhuang Daoren looked over and slowly said, "I had some conflicts with fellow Taoist, but I didn't do it out of my own will. I had to do it for the sake of the bigger picture. If fellow Taoist knows the truth, I believe you will understand my actions." Zhang Yan raised an eyebrow. "Oh. Then I'll have to ask." Jizhuang Daoren looked at him. "Do you know the true origin of that existence?" Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, "I've fought him head-on before. I'm guessing that he might have entered the world because of some kind of obsession." Taoist Jizhuang could not help but nod and said, "Fellow Taoist, you are very accurate." He paused for a while and continued, "Fellow Taoist, you should also know that in order to search for the secret of the upper realm, you caused the essence of creation to shatter, which resulted in the current situation." Zhang Yan nodded. He had already seen this when he reached the spirit refinement realm. Taoist Ji Zhuang continued, fellow Taoist, I'm afraid you don't know that although these great virtues were implicated by the destruction of the essence of creation and seemed to have sunk into eternal silence, before that, they all did one thing at the same time, and that was to place their will in the silence, hoping that they would be freed in the future. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. So, the existence of that existence is actually because of the will of the virtuous ones. Jizhuang Daoren nodded. That's right. Not only that, among us, as long as someone's cultivation improves by leaps and bounds and surpasses his peers, that existence will appear in the world. However, the destruction of the creation essence and the heavenly Tao are not without a price. The virtuous ones naturally have to pay with their bodies. But if they want to return, then the karma will fall on us and even the billions of people in the world. That's why that existence can devour everything. If no one stops him, when he devours everything, then the virtuous ones can appear again. Zhang Yan narrowed his eyes. So the reason why you left your aura to stop me was because of this? Jizhuang Daoren nodded. I'm not targeting you. I just don't want that existence to appear prematurely. Even if that person is not you, I will still try to stop him. When Zhang Yan heard this, he fell into deep thought. There were some things here that matched up with his previous guesses. However, he would not completely believe what this person said. He would have to continue to verify the truth in the future. He looked up and said, then, did you invite I here today for this? It was absolutely impossible to make him stop. The other side should understand this, unless they used force to subdue him. Although Jing Hu was not weak, he did not have the ability to subdue Bu Su Tian. That day, even that existence could not break into Bu Su Tian's territory, so there was no need to think about this person. Chapter 2097. Jizhuang Daoren was silent for a moment, then slowly said, I'm not trying to stop you again, but there's no point in doing so. Ever since you repelled that existence and split your divine essence, you've broken free from its karmic connection. Originally, Zhang Yan's cultivation was the fastest among his peers, so the manifestation of that existence would be triggered by him. It was precisely because of this that Taoist Ji Zhuang tried to stop him. Now, Zhang Yan could be said to have defeated that existence and stopped it from devouring everything. In reality, he had already broken this connection, so there was no point in continuing to stop him. If that existence wanted to continue, he could only find a way through others. Jizhuang Daoren said solemnly, although you've broken free yourself, as long as the Vedanta's obsession hasn't faded, this existence can never be broken. Although its divine essence has split, it will eventually rise again. Unless your cultivation is higher than the Vedanta's, no one can stop it. At this point, his tone became more serious. If that was all, then it would be fine. But now, we've discovered that those great virtues might still have a backup plan. Perhaps someone hopes that those great virtues will return, so they're secretly pushing for this. Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked, are you talking about the spiritium boom of all realms? Jizhuang Daoren said, that's right. He looked at Zhang Yan with a complicated gaze, fellow Taoist, your karmic connection has been severed. In order for that existence to return, this karmic connection will definitely fall on someone else. It's likely that it will choose someone from the lower realms to enter the spirit refinement realm, or it will choose someone else from our generation to effect the heaven's will. Apart from you and that fellow Taoist, everyone else is in it. Ancestor Yao Han said, the spiritium boom is not a good thing, fellow Taoist. The magic energy ripples across millions of worlds, and there will eventually be someone it chooses. Right now, we're looking for the source so that we can stop it. Jizhuang Daoren continued, if someone else from our generation cultivates to the second realm, then it's likely that fellow Taoist will be able to fuse with his divine essence again. Fellow Taoist's previous efforts may be in vain. Zhang Yan didn't comment on this and said, then I have a question. What if someone can really cultivate to the level of Vedanta? Jizhuang Daoren looked at him deeply and said, I know what you mean, fellow Taoist. However, as long as that existence recovers, no one will be able to compete with him in cultivation. Zhang Yan shook his head with a smile and said, "Then, what exactly do you want me to do by inviting me here?" Jizhuang Daoren said, "Fellow Taoist, you must understand that as long as someone from our generation makes progress in cultivation, there is a chance that this existence will return. Therefore, I believe that our two clans must work together to suppress the cultivation of everyone in our generation. As for those who manifest as innate treasure spirits, if they show themselves, we must find a way to kill them." At the end, he added, "Of course, fellow Taoist, you've already severed your karma, so you're not part of this." Zhang Yan looked around and said, "I have a question." Jizhuang Daoren said, "Please speak, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan said, "Since you know how dangerous that existence is, why don't you work together to fight against him? After all, he isn't that scary. I worked together with you last time to suppress him. If our two clans work together, even if that existence returns, it won't be hard to defeat him again." Jizhuang Daoren shook his head. "It's not that we haven't thought about what fellow Taoists said, but we won't be able to put an end to this matter. Moreover, if we are defeated once, then everything we've done before will be useless. He was someone who cherished his life the most, so how could he take such a risk?" Even now, he still found it hard to believe that Zhang Yan could do such a thing. In his eyes, that existence couldn't be defeated. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to come out and only released a strand of his aura to suppress his fellow Taoists. Ancestor Yao Han interrupted, "Aside from this matter, there is one more thing that we must not forget." He paused for a moment and saw Zhang Yan looking at him, so he continued, "And that is to sever the path of all living beings in the present world." Jizhuang Daoren nodded in agreement, "That's right. Although the living beings in the present world can't threaten us, if we don't try to improve our cultivation, that existence will definitely attack other living beings. As long as these spirit refinement cultivators were willing to work together, it wouldn't be hard to stop the heavenly Tao and prevent anyone from reaching the upper realm. Even if they were careless, they would be able to eliminate them immediately." He looked at Zhang Yan and said, "If we can do this, then we can rest easy. Fellow Taoist's future cultivation won't be disturbed. I wonder if fellow Taoist is willing to work together with us." Zhang Yan didn't answer immediately and fell into deep thought. He did not care whether Vedanta returned or not. In fact, with the appearance of a more profound Almighty, under the fusion and collision of mana, he might be able to unravel more unknown unknowns and pry into more secrets of the upper realm. But if it was as Ji Zhuang said, and he had to pay the price of devouring everything, then he would definitely try to stop it. One had to know that that existence would not let him go just because he had broken free from karma. Not killing him did not count as embezzling everything. It was just that the credibility of Ji Zhuang's words had yet to be determined. When he returned, he would find a way to verify it. As for the matter of cutting off the path of cultivation, he didn't agree with it because it was equivalent to cutting off the path of others in exchange for a moment of peace. Indeed, as Ji Zhuang said, after he was free from karma, he could still cultivate and wouldn't be restricted. But would the other party be so kind? He had a feeling that the path to the upper realm would have some kind of barrier. If he couldn't meet someone from the upper realm, he might not be able to cross it. After thinking about it, he said, "I can't decide on this alone. I need to go back and discuss with my fellow Taoists. I will give you an answer later." Jizhuang Daoren nodded and said, "No problem. Fellow Taoist, you can go back and think about it." He could see that Zhang Yan had the intention to leave, but because he knew it was only a clone, he didn't try to stop him. He turned to Elder Yao Han and said, "Fellow Taoist Yao Han, please send fellow Taoist Xian Yuan off on my behalf." Elder Yao Han stepped forward and said, "Fellow Taoist, please." After Zhang Yan bowed, he left the platform and walked out. At this time, he felt Patriarch Yao Han's divine will. His eyes flashed, and he accepted it. Elder Yao Han saw that Zhang Yan allowed his divine will to pass, so he laughed and said, "Just now, I see that fellow Taoist doesn't agree with this matter. In fact, I have a different opinion on this matter. Doing this will block my path, but I live under someone else's roof. I can't go against the will of Mirror Master Ji Zhuang." Zhang Yan looked at Elder Yao Han. It seemed that this person wasn't content with his lot. He seemed to have some thoughts about Ji Zhuang's position as mirror master. Zhang Yan didn't plan to interfere. Ji Zhuang wasn't easy to get along with. Although they hadn't had much contact, Zhang Yan could tell that Ji Zhuang valued his own life very much. He wouldn't allow the inner realm to fall into chaos. The two of them didn't say anything along the way. Soon, they left the mirror lake. When they came out, Zhang Yan felt the same feeling he had when he entered this place. Everything disappeared, and after a long time, he felt his body lighten. It was as if a suffocating person had returned to the surface of the water. He had walked out of the mirror lake. Elder Yao Han cupped his hands and said, "I'll send fellow Taoists to this place." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "I'll have to trouble fellow Taoists to send me off." Just as Elder Yao Han was about to leave, he suddenly thought of something and paused. He smiled deeply and said, "Fellow Taoist, I've had many dealings with you. Today, I want to ask you something. If your sect's patriarch wants to borrow that existence, what will you do?" Zhang Yan smiled. At his level of cultivation, he could sense that even the founding ancestor might not be able to predict everything. At the very least, there was one thing that he was certain of, and that was that his ascension to the spirit refinement realm was not part of the great underworld founding ancestor's plan. Looking at the past, the patriarch's true target was Taoist Xian Che. Although the patriarch gave every branch a certain chance, the most they could do was climb to the true Yang realm. It was almost impossible for them to ascend to the spirit refinement realm. But in the end, not only did he transcend, he even replaced Xian Che as Bu Su's heavenly master. This went against the patriarch's original plan. But there was no need for him to figure out what the patriarch was thinking. He couldn't see it, so there was no point in making wild guesses. If he could reach that level one day, he would ask the patriarch if there was anything he didn't understand. After Ancestor Yao Han left, Yang Kai's mind spun and he instantly arrived outside of Bu Su. Then he sank down and his consciousness returned to his body. After understanding everything about this trip, he fell into deep thought. He couldn't determine whether what Jizhuang Daoren said was true or not. The same thing could be said from a different perspective, so he couldn't make a decision. But there was someone who might be able to dispel his doubts. This person was the sword-wielding Taoist suspected to be the Shaoqing patriarch. From the fact that he was the first to stop that existence, it could be seen that he knew something. When he left that day, he didn't leave behind any communication methods, but he still had the sword light in his hand. He could use it to contact someone. After making up his mind, he immediately sent out another clone, which entered the void and drew out the sword light. Not long after, he suddenly felt something in his heart. He looked up and saw a sword light appearing out of thin air. In the silence, it was like a sea of stars flashing. The fluctuating world retreated, and then a voice came from behind him. "Fellow Taoist, why are you looking for me?" Chapter 2098. Forefather Yao Han returned to the mirror lake and returned to the platform. He cupped his hands towards Jizhuang Daoren and said, "That Taoist Zhang has already left." Jizhuang Daoren said, "Fellow Taoist Yao Han, do you think this person will agree with us?" Forefather Yao Han chuckled and said, "I stand by my previous words. This person is determined to advance and will never agree to our conditions." Jizhuang Daoren looked at the others and said, "What do you all think?" Without waiting for anyone to speak, he looked at Xian Che and Towering Firmament and said, "You two have interacted with that Taoist Zhang before. If you have a different opinion, why don't you voice it out?" Ever since Shen Xiao and Xian Che arrived, they rarely spoke. This was because they could tell that even though Taoist Ji Zhuang appeared to be modest and magnanimous, he was, in fact, cautious on the inside and tolerant on the outside. Thus, when they discussed inviting Zhang Yan previously, they had been watching coldly from the sidelines. The two understood that this person wasn't trying to hear their opinion, but to see their attitude. Even if it was only on the surface, why would he ask now? They could have come to them during the discussion, so the more they tried to hide it, the more they would arouse suspicion. Right now, all they had to do was speak the truth. Taoist Soaring Firmament smiled and said, I don't think this will be of much benefit to that Taoist Zhang. Instead, he will have to suppress the fellow Taoists who rely on Busu Heaven for protection. He doesn't need to do this. Jizhuang Daoren said, "Oh, isn't it beneficial for him to be the only one cultivating?" Taoist Soaring Firmament said, "But he doesn't need to make an agreement with fellow Taoist. He can continue cultivating. There is no need for this." Taoist Xian Che said solemnly, "I don't know anything else. I only know that Taoist Zhang has someone from a sect behind him. He can't cut off the path of the sect." Jizhuang Daoren grunted, but he wasn't unhappy. Instead, he said in a pleasant tone, "Your words are somewhat reasonable." He looked at forefather Yao Han. "Fellow Taoist Yao Han, if this person really does not agree, then we will proceed with our original plan." In the silence, Zhang Yan turned around and saw the sword-wielding Taoist standing there with his back facing him. This person had never shown his face to others. Xiao Qin was able to guess the reason for this. However, after hearing some of Jizhuang Daoren's words, Xiao Qin had a vague answer in his heart. But today, he wasn't here to pursue this matter. He said, "The reason I sought you out this time is because I have something to verify." Although he had only interacted with this person a couple of times, he clearly understood that there was no need to beat around the bush when speaking to this person. If there was anything, he could just ask directly. The sword-wielding Taoist said, "Go ahead." Zhang Yan said, "Not long ago, I was invited by a fellow Taoist to be his guest. However, what he said afterwards made I somewhat puzzled. He came down and picked out the important parts of what Jizhuang had said. He then said, 'Fellow Taoist, how trustworthy is this person's words?'" The sword-wielding Taoist didn't say anything else. Instead, he said, "Fellow Taoist, have you met Yao Han?" Zhang Yan nodded. "Not long ago, just now." The sword-wielding Taoist said, "When I met him, I said that he wasn't someone I knew. However, there was something I didn't say. I am no longer the person I was back then." Zhang Yan's heart trembled. The sword-wielding Taoist said, "I might have known what happened when the creation essence was broken, but I've already cut it off. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here. Unless someone who personally experienced it returns, they won't be able to know the truth." Fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang said that existence was the will of the Vedanta and that he needed to devour them as compensation. This is indeed true, or else I wouldn't have come out to stop him. However, this isn't necessarily the will of all the Vedanta. Everyone's thoughts are different, and each Vedanta's Tao is different, so how could they all be the same? Hearing this, Zhang Yan's eyes unconsciously opened up. Some of his doubts were also resolved. It seemed that the manifestation of that existence might have been done by one of the Vedanta. Of course, there might be more than one of them, but it definitely wasn't all of them. Speaking of which, take the great underworld patriarch for example. Since he had arranged for Xian Che to reach the spirit refinement realm, there was no need for him to be devoured by that existence. Otherwise, it would be contradictory. However, the threat of that existence was real. No matter what Jizhuang Daoren's goal was, his methods were still aimed at that existence. He thought for a moment and said, "Jizhuang once said that if many of our fellow Taoists are stopped from pursuing the higher realms, and if we take away the fate of the great Tao of billions of living beings in this world, that existence will never be able to recover its strength. Do you think this is feasible?" The Taoist who wielded the sword acted as if he didn't care at all. He said, "That's not important. If all of you think that suppressing your cultivation will make it difficult for that person to trigger karma, then do so." Zhang Yan was surprised to see that the sword-wielding Taoist's attitude was so casual, but he could understand what the sword-wielding Taoist was thinking. From the sword-wielding Taoist's point of view, there was probably no need to discuss this matter any further. After all, even if Ji Zhuang succeeded, it wouldn't last forever. After all, Ji Zhuang and the others couldn't calculate every single day. The slightest mistake would result in failure. In fact, this wasn't necessarily better than taking the initiative to attack and suppress that existence. It was just that Jizhuang Daoren was more conservative and didn't want to fight to the death with that existence out of cherishing his own life. That was why he did his best to make this choice. Moreover, how could the arrangements of a virtuous virtue be broken so easily? Even if they really carried it out, it would only be a temporary relief. It wouldn't solve the root of the problem. Therefore, no matter what they did, the general trend couldn't be changed. Could it be that Ji Zhuang couldn't see this? That might not be the case. It was just that he chose a path that was beneficial to him and didn't have to take any risks. It didn't mean that this method was necessarily better than taking the initiative to suppress that existence. After understanding this, he bowed and said, "Thank you for dispelling my doubts, fellow Taoist." The sword-wielding Taoist nodded at him and didn't say anything else. With a turn of the sword light, he instantly entered the void and disappeared. Zhang Yan watched him leave. Although he was suspected to be the Shaoqing founding master, as he said, he wasn't the entirety of this founding master. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been indifferent to the Shaoqing disciples when he mentioned suppressing the Tao path of all living beings in the world. Although it was said that upper realm bigwigs were like looking at a painting to the matters of the present world, it was not without a purpose when he passed down his orthodoxy and set up a sphere in Busushan. With a thought, his consciousness returned to his body in the next moment. He stood up and walked a few steps. What he was thinking now was, if he rejected the suggestion of Ji Zhuang and the others, what would they do? There was at least one way to achieve this goal, and that was to start a battle. Although spirit refinement cultivators could improve themselves in battle and learn more about the mysteries of the Tao through the confrontation of magic power, it was very unlikely for them to directly cross a barrier in battle. Even if they dared to do so, the opponent would not give them the chance to do so if they were prepared. When he passed the enlightenment barrier, if Ji Zhuang didn't come with his chi activity incarnation and instead came with his actual body, it would be almost impossible for him to succeed. Of course, the prerequisite was that the other party could attack into Busushan. However, he felt that other than that, the other party might have other methods. Since he couldn't see it now, he could only deal with it as it came. He pondered for a while and decided to discuss this matter with Shen Cheng, Qing Sheng, and the others who were under the protection of Busu Tian. He wanted to see what they thought. As the master, he could do whatever he wanted without asking for the opinions of others. However, because he didn't seal the door to Busushan, this matter couldn't be hidden. Maybe Ji Zhuang and the others could use the magic power to spread the news to everyone. Instead of that, it was better to talk about it now. Even if someone had a different opinion, he could know in advance. With a thought, an incarnation appeared in the meeting hall and ordered the formation spirit to send talisman books to the places where the spirit refinement cultivators were. Not long after the letter was sent out, Taoist Shin Cheng, Boy Shin Cheng, Zhan Yuan, Qing Sheng, Qin Shu, Wan Fang, Bing Kong, and the others all arrived. After greeting Zhang Yan, they sat down in the hall. Zhang Yan exchanged a few pleasantries with the crowd before explaining the purpose of gathering them here. At the same time, he repeated Taoist Ji Zhuang's words without changing a single word. When Zhan Yuan heard this, he first stood up and bowed to Zhang Yan. He said seriously, "Thank you for telling us this." It wasn't difficult for him to see that if this matter was done, it would actually be very beneficial to Zhang Yan. As there was nothing that could restrain the spirit refinement cultivators, to achieve this matter, they could only rely on the two masters, Jizhuang Daoren and Zhang Yan. Once the two of them joined forces, not only would there be no external threats, they could also help the other party suppress the internal forces. From then on, they could always be above everyone. However, Zhang Yan chose to say this. It was clear that he was ready to let everyone have the choice, which made him admire him very much. Taoist Qing Sheng said coldly, "This person is afraid of that existence. He doesn't think about how to defeat him, but instead wants to suppress his fellow Taoists in order to survive. This person is even more annoying than those cowardly people." Taoist Xinchang pondered for a while and said, "If I don't agree, what will happen?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "The only thing they can do is to attack me because of this. But in Busu heaven, you don't have to worry about this." Taoist Qingxing snorted and said, "Why would I be afraid of him?" Taoist Xinchang said in a deep voice, "If he attacks, we will work together to fight against him." Daoist Xuanyuan thought for a bit and said, if he doesn't have fellow Daoist Xuanyuan's approval, I'm afraid he won't even be able to suppress the people of his own inner realm. I think we should refuse. Wan Fang and Bing Kong also nodded in agreement. Chen Shu had just tasted the sweetness of cultivation, so how could she be willing to stop now? She also said, I am also willing to advance and retreat with everyone. Zhang Yan nodded and said, since everyone doesn't agree with this matter, then it's decided. With that, he waved his sleeve and a ray of light flew out, turning into a jade talisman. He was pulled by the aura and fell toward the mirror lake. Chapter 2099. After Zhang Yan sent the letter, he thought that it would take some time before there would be a reply from the other side, or perhaps there would be no reply at all. However, what was surprising was that not long after, there were fluctuations of magic power in the void. The other party's reply had already landed outside the void. He picked up the jade talisman and opened it. It was Jizhuang Doran's reply. He said that since Zhang Yan didn't agree, then there was no harm in putting this matter aside and slowly discussing it later. Then he changed the topic and said that there was another matter that was very important right now. It was the person who had caused all the spiritual energy in the world to flourish. He said that if he left this person alone, he wouldn't just do these things. If he took the initiative to help that existence, things would become even more troublesome. That was why he invited Zhao Jiuge to find that person and then eliminate him. It wasn't difficult for Zhang Yan to see that Jizhuang Doran's purpose was to suppress the cultivation of the inner realm cultivators to prevent that existence from returning. However, the person who had caused this spiritual energy was not here. If that person was allowed to cultivate, then even if they suppressed all their peers, it would be useless. In truth, there might be other people of the same generation hiding in the void. According to Jizhuang Doran's original plan, they should have joined forces to suppress and destroy these people. However, not daring to face a strong enemy and bullying the weak instead, was not something he would do. He thought about it for a while. When he sensed the spiritual vigor last time, he knew that this person was neither good nor evil. He was most likely not a cultivator of the same generation as he had imagined. Instead, he seemed to be an innate treasure spirit, but there was also a possibility that he had some other background. It was unlikely that he would help that existence. If this person really wanted to do this, he wouldn't have ignored that existence and gone to do something that had caused this spiritual energy. Now that this person had caused this spiritual energy and didn't seem to want to stop, Zhao Jiuge felt that even if there was a way to stop it, there was no need to rush. When it really stopped, it wouldn't be too late to act. However, if the people on Ji Zhuang's side wanted to do something, he couldn't stop them. After discussing with the people in the hall for a bit, he immediately sent a letter saying that he had no time to deal with this matter. Seeing that this matter was settled for the time being, everyone in the hall bid their farewells. Zhang Yan waited for everyone to leave before his consciousness returned to the Qinghuan Palace. He thought about it. If the person who had caused this spiritual energy was really cooperating with that person, then even if he went to chase him, there would be no result. Even if he went to chase him, there would be no result. In fact, he didn't reject seeing those upper realm great virtues, but he still needed to be vigilant. It was important to know that the existence could only be the will of one of them. It was hard to imagine how strong such a person was. If he returned right in front of him and showed malice, he didn't think he could fight against it. That existence couldn't break into Butian, but it wasn't impossible for an upper realm great virtue to do so. Thinking of this, he decided to get rid of the strange power in Butian as soon as possible. If he could do this, then Butian's defense would be greatly improved. Before his cultivation reached the second realm, he could feel the existence of these strange powers, but he couldn't touch them, let alone do anything to them. But now, as his cultivation improved, he felt that it wouldn't be difficult for him to fight against the weaker ones. And as long as he could collide with them, he could gradually expel them. After all, these were all left behind by the powerful people in the past, so he might be able to see more of the great Tao from them. As he sat and watched, 3 years passed without him noticing. One day, he suddenly felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart. He came out of his meditation and looked in a certain direction. There, a muddy realm was about to approach Butian. Perhaps it would arrive soon. If his judgment was correct, this should be the place where the Shaoqing predecessors ascended. Since Muddy Realm was here, he definitely had to investigate it. However, the Shaoqing sect was an ally. If he went there, it was best to call a fellow Shaoqing sect member to go with him. And he also needed to send a disciple, who had at least entered the mortal transformation realm. He thought for a while. His eldest disciple, Lu Yeni, was the most suitable. She also cultivated the sword pill, and her strength was sufficient. But because of this, it wasn't appropriate to send her. Because he knew that before Sect Master Yu took over, there was another sect in the Shaoqing sect. They viewed all sword wielders outside the sect as heretics. Although not everyone in that realm was like that, knowing this, there was no need to initiate conflict. After all, the two sects were on good terms. He called Jing Yu in and ordered, "Go find Tian Kun." Not long after, Tian Kun came into the hall. He bowed and said, "Disciple pays his respects to master." Zhang Yan said, "Outside the heavens, a muddy realm has descended. Master needs you to go there. However, this place is suspected to be the place where the Shaoqing predecessors ascended. Master will find a fellow Shaoqing Daoist to go with you. After you return, you can make some preparations." Tian Kun bowed and said, "Disciple obeys." In the mountain and sea realms Tianyue, the competition was still ongoing. With the arrival of the sects from beyond the heavens, the competition had evolved into a contest between the disciples of the mountain and sea realm and their peers from beyond the heavens. Yu Shuyan stood on a flying peak, the sword pill circling around her. After experiencing the heart test in the fog, in addition to the past 10 years of competition, her temperament had been polished to an incomparably perfect state. The originally pure white sword pill had become as pure as colored glass, and there was a trace of intelligent sword awareness within it that resonated with her. Currently, she had won every match in the competition and had yet to meet a worthy opponent. In the end, many of her opponents admitted defeat as soon as they saw her. In fact, she was not the only one. Almost all the other Shaoqing disciples who had survived the fog were active in the competition grand meet. Almost none of them had ever lost a match against their peers. To them, they could compete with others every day, and they could also experience the different methods of the various sections. They could fight against even more powerful opponents. It was indeed like a grand meet, and many of their fellow disciples were incomparably envious of this. Among her peers, the only ones who could be considered opponents were her peers from Qinsang School. However, up until now, both sides had yet to meet. It was not that there was no chance, but that the upper echelons had deliberately separated the two sides. Only at the end of the grand meet, just now, would there be a chance for them to meet. Yu Shuyan was also looking forward to that day. As her fighting spirit rose in her heart, the sword pill let out a clear sword hum. A streak of white flew over from afar and arrived in front of her in an instant. It was a Shaoqing disciple. He bowed to her and said, "Senior sister, Grandmaster is looking for you. He seems to want to take care of something." Yu Shuyan thanked him and circulated her magic power. In an instant, her sword flew up, and she turned into a streak of light and flew away. The flying peak was not far from the Shaoqing base. Not long after, she returned. After entering the hall, she saw that a few Yuanying elders were also there, while Ran Xiushu was standing on the stairs. Thus, she went up to greet him. Ran Xiushu looked at her a few times and said with satisfaction, "Shui Yan, you've done well these past 10 years. Even though you've learned the killing sword, you're still my disciple after all. You've done me proud." Yu Ning muttered something at the side. Yu Shuyan sighed softly. Every once in a while, her grandmaster would take turns to call her and a few other disciples over to encourage them. He wanted to show off his existence, and he would never get tired of it. She had already gotten used to it over the years. Ran Xiushu said, "The Shaoqing flying sword's killing sword technique is known throughout the world. You've contributed to it as well. Today, I'll bestow you with a strand of Jun Yang's spiritual essence. As he spoke, he extended his finger and a streak of light entered her body. The few Yuanying elders were shocked. Jun Yang's spiritual essence was extremely useful, and it could even be used to elevate one's grotto heaven. However, Yu Shuyan had not even completed her Yuanying cultivation. Wasn't it too early to give her such a reward? If she kept this on her, it would probably only attract others' greed. Yu Ning raised her head and said, "This, master." Ran Shoshu waved his hand and said, "I'm willing to give it to you. You don't have to say anything." Yu Ning curled her lips and said softly, "I didn't give it to me when I performed a meritorious deed back then." Ran Shoshu looked at Yu Shuyan and said slowly, "Although this thing is good, it might cause many people to come and snatch it. If you're not willing to accept it, you can return it." Yu Shuyan said without hesitation, "Thank you, Grandmaster, for bestowing it. I'm confident that I can protect it." Ran Shoshu smiled. He had already received a letter from the sect asking him to go with his fellow Taoists from Qinsang School to the place where a senior from the sect was suspected to have ascended. Because he had to leave early, he had given out the reward that was supposed to be reserved for the last time in advance. Seeing that he had finished giving out instructions, he changed his mind and leaped into the sky before everyone's eyes. In the next moment, he arrived in the sky and saw that a young Taoist with a calm expression was already waiting there. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Tian, you're too kind." Tian Kun returned the greeting and said, "Fellow Taoist Ran, are you ready?" Ran Shoshu nodded and confidently put his sleeves behind his back. He said, "We can set off." Tian Kun took out a jade talisman from his sleeve and sent it out. In an instant, a spiritual light spread out in front of him. He said, "This is a door between two worlds that Master used his magic to open. From here, we can go to." He paused, realizing that Ran Shoshu had already entered before he could finish his sentence, so he silently followed. As soon as he passed through the portal, he saw Ran Shoshu hovering in midair, looking around at the world around him. He looked around, and realized that this place didn't look very different from an ordinary heaven realm. However, the spiritual opportunity here was flourishing, and could even be compared to the mountain and sea realm. However, after sensing it, he found that this place was somewhat different from the immortal abode that he had imagined. There were cities and settlements everywhere, and most of them were mortals. He could vaguely sense a strong aura, but when he tried to find it, he could not feel it. Ran Shoshu said, "Fellow Taoist Tian, from the looks of it, if there is an almighty cultivator, he might be hiding in a world within a world. Since we can't find him at the moment, why don't we go around and see if we can find some clues?" Tian Kun said in a low voice, "As long as you think it's feasible." Ran Shoshu made some calculations, and his eyes lit up. He said, "That's interesting. Follow me, fellow Taoist." With a shift, he was already flying in a direction. Chapter 2100. When Tian Kun saw Ran Shoshu escape, he followed the qi activity and made a turn. In an instant, he arrived on a plain. Looking down from above, he could see a city with about 1 million people in the distance. Directly below them was a wide flat land in the suburbs of the city. Beside a shallow river that was flowing rapidly, dozens of luxurious carriages were parked there. The carriages were covered with blankets and brocade, and there were also tent stands and firewood stoves. It seemed like the nobles of the mortal world were out for an outing. At this moment, there was a white-bearded old man holding a magic sword. He was practicing his swordsmanship, and each move was very methodical. About 20 children dressed in bright clothes were watching seriously there, and they even held wooden swords in their hands to imitate, while servants and guards kept far away, not daring to come close. Ran Shoshu muttered to himself, "This method, maybe it's a game of someone from the same sect." This old man was clearly just a mortal, but his comprehension of swordsmanship was far beyond his limits. However, his comprehension of swordsmanship far exceeded his own limits, and he faintly had the aura of an immortal, which was somewhat similar to the Shaoqing sect. In fact, the Shaoqing sect also had the method of using magic swords, and there were even many similar treasures, but usually, such people rarely reached a high level. At this moment, Tian Kun looked over and realized that this old man's divine chi was soaring into the sky, and it was impossible to see where he was. Although his spirit belonged to him, and his words and actions were very natural, he was in fact a marionette. His life experience and even temperament were arranged by someone in advance, and he could not take even half a step out of line. Simply put, he was like a chess piece. He could only act according to the rules of the chess game, but he could never transcend beyond the chessboard, and he did not know about it. With a rough glance, he saw many similar chi activities, and there were even more in the distance, but he did not understand why the upper realm cultivators here would do this. Ran Xiushu also realized this, but he was a little puzzled, because according to the Shaoqing sect's style of doing things, they would definitely not put their attention on these mortals, so this place was probably not as simple as the place where the previous generations ascended. The past and future of these mortals were actually woven by the powerful beings behind them, so they couldn't see anything useful. However, since the divine chi was related to Xiu, it left some clues. Ran Xiushu simply followed these auras and soon found a realm gate in this world. Without saying anything, he walked in. Tian Kun originally wanted to persuade him to investigate first, but seeing this, he could only follow. However, he also knew that some cultivators of the Shaoqing sect had an extraordinary sense of danger. Perhaps Ran Xiushu was such a person. After the two of them passed through the realm gate, they saw that the scenery here was beautiful. The mountains were painted green, and the multicolored light shone brightly. In front of them was a short mountain, and there was a Taoist temple. Under the cover of the temple's shrine, there was a Taoist child curled up there. Ran Xiushu walked over and asked, "Are you the attendant here?" The Taoist boy rubbed his eyes and got up. He bowed and said, "Greetings, immortal elders. I am the one guarding this place." Ran Xiushu said, "What is this place? What is the name of this temple?" The Taoist boy said, "This is Mount Rhinoceros Emperor Temple." At this moment, he turned around and pointed, saying, "Immortal elders, my temple's master is here." Just now, Ran Xiushu sensed someone coming over. When they looked over, they saw a Taoist wearing straw shoes and plain clothes walking out. He came forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, immortal elders. May I know where you are from, and what can I do for you?" Ran Xiushu said with interest, "Oh. Could it be that there are many people like us who come and go here?" The temple master said ambiguously, "Not few, but not many." Ran Xiushu said, "We came here to visit our seniors. Are there any immortal elders who can control flying swords in this area?" The temple master's eyes flickered, and he smiled. He said, "Are you talking about the sword immortals who originally lived in the Immortal Mountain?" Ran Xiushu said, "Originally? Could it be that they are no longer here?" The temple master lowered his gaze and said, "I don't know much about this. I only heard that a few thousand years ago, the sword immortals who lived in the Immortal Mountain bestowed this area to us in search of the immortal technique. Then, they went to another world through a door between the two worlds, but they have yet to return." Ran Xiushu didn't look regretful at all. She asked, "I wonder if they left anything behind before they left. After all, they were my seniors. Now that they're gone, I'll need to find something as proof so that I can answer to the sect when they ask about it in the future." The temple master said, "I haven't been cultivating for a long time, so I haven't seen those sword immortals, so I'm not too sure about this." Ran Xiushu said, "How about this? Even though my seniors have left this place, the abodes they used to live in should still be there. Can you bring us there?" The temple master seemed to be in a difficult position. He said, "For this matter, I need to ask the immortals here." Ran Xiushu said, "It's fine. You can go back and ask them. I'll just wait here." The temple master hesitated for a moment before saying, "If the two of you don't mind, why don't you stay here for the night? I'll go back and report to the immortals." He then called out to the Taoist child and asked him to bring out the spirit fruits and immortal tea in the temple for the two of them before he left. Ran Xiushu saw that Tian Kun was standing at the side without saying a word, so she said, "What do you think, Taoist Ran?" Tian Kun said, "It's all up to you." He came here today only to be a witness. He wouldn't interfere with what Ran Shoshu wanted to do, unless they encountered some life-threatening danger. Ran Shoshu chuckled and said, "Since we have nothing to do, why don't you tell us your opinion?" Tian Kun saw that he was insistent, so he pondered for a moment before saying, "Since you insist, I'll give you my humble opinion." Ran Shoshu said, "Please go ahead." Tian Kun said, "Just now, that Taoist seems to be very polite, but he's actually repulsed and wary of us, especially after hearing that we've asked about the Shaoqing seniors. There must be something hidden here. He might find an excuse to reject Taoist Ran's invitation, and he won't let us get what we want so easily." Ran Shoshu smiled. "If that's the case, we'll go look for him ourselves. This matter is finally interesting." Just as the Abbey Dean reported the arrival of the two of them, a few people's divine wills gathered in a mysterious place. One of them said, "Exalted Gord, more sword immortals from the lower realm have come here. I've already said that since those sword immortals ascended from other realms, as long as their sects aren't destroyed, there will definitely be people coming here. When the time comes, they'll take back this land no matter what. We can't occupy this place." Someone sneered. "Take back. The spiritual opportunity where we were originally at has been lost, and we've been wandering for a long time. It wasn't easy for us to find a place to stay in this realm. Those sword immortals just left, and now that we've been working hard for thousands of years, anyone who comes here wants to take it back. How can it be so easy?" The person who spoke earlier mocked, "We've seen the techniques of those sword immortals back then. Judging from your tone, are you going to personally suppress these two?" The person who spoke later said, "How would we know if we haven't fought them?" After the two of them argued for a while, the person who was called Exalted Gord finally spoke. He said in a deep voice, "Although there are two sword immortals this time, we're no longer the weak ones from back then. If they treat us as guests, then we'll treat them well and send them away as soon as possible." Someone asked, "What if the two of them insist on staying here?" Exalted Gord said, "Then we'll have to resort to some tricks. This is our realm after all, and the spiritual opportunity is much more prosperous than before. I dare say that there aren't many treasured lands like this in the heavens, so we can't hand it over no matter what." Ran Shoshu and Tian Kun had only waited in the monastery for half a day when they sensed a divine will approaching them. Ran Shoshu and Tian Kun discussed for a while before they accepted it. They then entered the unknown together, and they saw an unfamiliar cultivator standing there. He bowed at them and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." The two of them returned the greeting, and Ran Shoshu said, "How should I address you, fellow Taoist?" The cultivator seemed unwilling to reveal his surname, and he sighed. "Let's not talk about my secular name. May I ask if you're really the descendants of those sword immortals?" With a thought, Ran Shoshu's sword light appeared. Even though it was within the divine will, it was not difficult for her to reveal her techniques. The cultivator saw it and quickly said, "As expected, you're the descendants of those sword immortals. I've received a favor from one of them previously, so I have an important matter to inform you." Ran Shoshu asked, "What is it?" The cultivator said solemnly, "I'm afraid that the people here are going to harm you." Ran Shoshu was not afraid at all, and instead, her interest was piqued. She asked, "What's the reason?" The cultivator sighed and said, "We're originally people from the outside world, and we were later taken in by a few sword immortals in this realm. Later on, those sword immortals wanted to go beyond the heavens for some reason, so they left this realm for us to look after. In the beginning, we were very attentive, and we took good care of this realm. However, after that, the entrance closed on its own, and a few of us thought that those sword immortals would never return, so we treated this realm as our own. However, now that the two of you are here, they're afraid that they'll ask for this realm back." Ran Shoshu smiled and said, "However, I have a question. Did those sword immortals leave anything behind?" The cultivator said, "Those cave abodes still have restrictions left behind, and we've never entered them before. Perhaps they've left something behind, but now that the outside is sealed by restrictions, I'm afraid that you won't be able to get close." Ran Shoshu nodded. "Thank you for informing us about this. The cultivator lowered his head and said, I'm ashamed. It's good that you don't blame us. After Ran Xiushu asked a few more questions, the cultivator retreated, and he himself also retreated from the divine will. He then clapped his hands and said with a smile, this is wonderful. Tian Kun was puzzled. What's wonderful about it? Ran Xiushu said excitedly, I originally thought that we're only here to acknowledge a few sword immortals and exchange some pleasantries before coming back to pay our respects. That would be rather boring, but I didn't expect it to be like this. I do hope that this cultivator can be strong to the end. If that's the case, wouldn't it be delightful for our Shaoqing to raise our swords against him? Chapter 2101. The cultivators of Rhinoceros Mountain were only thinking about how to send Ran Xiushu and Tian Kun away as soon as possible, so they didn't want to fight them. Although in the eyes of this generation, it was impossible for the two of them to contact the sects behind them after they ascended to this place, and they could be said to be alone, they were very clear about the power of flying swords. If the two of them didn't show any hostility, then they naturally wouldn't make the first move. On the second day, this generation sent a cultivator with the surname Qi. He was also a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, but from the aura he revealed, he was far inferior to the two of them. He seemed to be able to determine that there was some gap between him and the two of them, so his attitude was rather humble. After greeting them, he said with great regret, I heard that the two of you are looking for the cave abodes of those sword immortals. I'm afraid you won't be able to do as you wish. Ran Xiushu wasn't unhappy at all. Instead, she looked as if she wanted to see what kind of excuse they could come up with. Oh. Why is that? The cultivator with the surname Qi lowered his head slightly under his mocking gaze and sighed. Those cave abodes were originally floating in the sky, and we've never been there before. It's just that after those sword immortals left, they disappeared without a trace. We don't know where they are either. Naturally, this wasn't the truth. Those sword immortals didn't have just one cave abode back then. There were indeed a few that were floating in the sky, and it was suspected that they had left with the sword immortals. However, there were still a few abodes left on the continent. It wasn't that these people didn't have any ideas about the cave abodes. They had tried to enter them to search for the secret sword cultivation technique, but there was still a strand of sword Qi left in them. Until now, they still had no way to deal with it. Most importantly, they didn't know what exactly was left in there. If there was a way to open the door between the two worlds, then it was something they didn't want to see. Thus, just yesterday, they set up layer after layer of restrictive formations outside, completely sealing this place. Ran Xiushu didn't dwell on this issue and casually asked, I sensed many cultivators entering and leaving the heaven and earth door. Could it be that these fellow Taoists came from other realms? The cultivator with the surname Qi didn't hide this. From their point of view, this was the realm of those sword immortals, so the sect definitely had records of it. They were just testing him now. If he didn't even dare to admit this, then it was clearly saying that there was something wrong with him. He said, indeed. There are many doors between the two worlds in this realm, and from time to time, there are outer realm cultivators who come here. Ran Xiushu asked, then, did my seniors also use this method to head to other domains? The cultivator surnamed Qi hurriedly said, that's not the case. The door I spoke of originally existed here. After I entered this realm, it rarely changed. As for the place where those sword immortals went, there was originally no door there. However, those sword immortals used some unknown method to open one out of thin air. After they left, the door closed on its own and we don't know how to open it again. We came from realm of Tian, he said, of to be of Shosi to say, and of sect of to of Tian of. Of we came. The cultivator with the surname Qi said, oh, fellow Taoist, what you saw was a chess game of our generation. Speaking of this, he became interested. Come, let me tell you. I'm an expert in this field. He gave a more detailed explanation. Among these chess pieces, there were Wu Zis, Wen Zis, Jiang Zis, Emperor Zis, as well as the sons of the 100 craftsmen and hermits. All the upper realm cultivators used these mortals as chess pieces to fight against each other. A single game of chess could last for hundreds of years and involve the rise and fall of many dynasties. Ran Xiushu was puzzled. What's the meaning of this? The cultivator with the surname Qi said, it's fun. It's just like chess in the mortal world, but with mortals as the chess pieces and the world as the chessboard. The changes of the world are all within it. At this moment, he added, this wasn't created by our generation. Rumor has it that it was passed down by a certain great expert. Ran Xiushu snorted disdainfully at this. He really couldn't see the fun in manipulating a few mortals to fight here and there. In his heart, pursuing the mysteries of the great Tao and fighting with one's sword against one's opponent was supreme fun. Every time he passed a barrier and defeated an opponent, the feeling of accomplishment was indescribable. Therefore, he really didn't think much of this kind of practice. Tian Kun watched from the side, not saying anything. Cultivation was all about seeking transcendence. Whatever one wanted to do, they could do it. Outsiders might think it was beneath them, but as long as they felt that it was good, it was fine. There were also cultivators who played chess for fun. Just as he said, this was actually replacing the chess pieces with mortals. However, he didn't like this kind of action because chess pieces were inanimate objects while mortals were living beings. However, he wouldn't oppose it because of this. After all, this wasn't the territory of Qinsang's school. Ran Xiushu couldn't stand watching this, so she said, fellow Taoist, can you bring us to the few doors of heaven and earth to take a look? Seeing that the two of them didn't dare to be interested, Cultivator Qi felt very regretful. However, he still remembered the matter at hand, so he nodded and said, of course. Please follow me. Under his lead, Ran Xiushu and Tian Kun arrived in front of a grand light screen. The edges of the screen gradually blended into the void. It could be seen that this place was originally suspended in midair, but later on, people built an altar that was thousands of miles wide below it. It looked very magnificent. Cultivator Qi said, this door is relatively stable. I don't know how many realms on the other side lead to this place, but the spiritual vigor of each realm is far inferior to ours. Therefore, when cultivators from other realms come here, they usually don't leave. Those who can come here are all first-rate grotto heaven cultivators, so there aren't many of them. Ran Xiushu took a glance. This doors of heaven and earth could stand here for a long time. This didn't seem to be a method that a mortal metamorphosis cultivator could use. It could also be the work of an upper realm cultivator, but it could also be created by a patriarch. She said, relatively stable. In other words, there are still places that are unstable here. The cultivator surnamed Qi replied, that's right. There are about a dozen of these doors. Some of them have been standing here for a long time while others disappear after a certain period of time. Then, they reappear after a certain period of time. It seems that there are quite a few of these doors. Ran Xiushu said, can fellow Taoist take me to that place to take a look? Cultivator Qi didn't mind. He immediately led the two of them to another door of heaven and earth. He pointed and said, this door disappears every 300 years and reappears after another 300 years. It has been here for more than 200 years. Perhaps it won't be long before it disappears again. There was something he didn't say here. Although one could leave this realm, it didn't mean that one could return. Previously, his companions had gone in to investigate, but they didn't find anything. Because they didn't have the courage to go to the other side, they couldn't confirm whether the person was dead or alive. After that, Ran Xiushu was led to the other doors of heaven and earth. However, the two of them seemed to lose interest after that. They took out a flying boat and said that they wanted to go sightseeing, so they didn't need Cultivator Qi to accompany them. Cultivator Qi didn't force them. After bidding farewell to the two of them, he returned to his cave residence. Then, he shifted his consciousness and entered an unknown place. A moment later, True Gourd's figure appeared and asked, fellow Taoist Qi, how is the situation? Cultivator Qi pondered for a moment and said, from what I can see, the two of them don't seem to have any desire to find their ancestors' cave residence. Instead, they are more interested in the outer realm and outer realm. They have taken a look at almost all the doors of heaven and earth. True Gourd's spirits rose slightly and he said, if that's really the case, it's good news. Cultivator Chi said, there's one more thing. From what I saw today, one of them is undoubtedly a sword cultivator. However, I don't think the other one has such a background. True Gourd's thoughts quickly spun. They were most afraid of flying swords, but if there was only one sword cultivator, would it be possible? He thought for a moment and suppressed this thought. Since the other person was able to travel together with a sword cultivator, he must be quite powerful. Now that the two of them could leave, there was no need to cause any more trouble. On the flying ship, Ran Xiushu looked at the magnificent scenery around him and said, today, when I used the sword orb to travel between heaven and earth, I sensed several strands of sword chi buried here. However, they were surrounded by layers of restrictive formations. Our Shaoqing cultivators' cave residences never have any restrictive formations. Whenever danger approaches, the swords will automatically sense it. Therefore, this should be the doing of this person. Tian Kun asked, what do you intend to do, fellow Taoist? Ran Xiushu said, I've more or less explored this area. I'll go back to the mountain and sea realm and report this matter. Then, the sect will make a decision. He guessed that the clues to the whereabouts of the seniors could only be found in those cave residences. However, he was actually not enthusiastic about these things. Those people were ascended in the first place. It would be good if he could meet them, but it did not matter if he could not. On the other hand, the people here had actually occupied the place where Shaoqing had ascended. This made him impatient to bring back this news. Since he had no objections, Tian Kun took out a talisman and unfolded it. In the blink of an eye, a spiritual light spread out, and the flying ship entered it. The two of them felt their vision blur for a moment, and then the scenery around them changed. They were back in the mountain and sea realm. Because they had to report to the elders of the sect, the two of them bowed and said their goodbyes. After Ran Xiushu left the flying ship, he broke through heaven and earth and headed toward the half-realm. In order to prevent cultivators from beyond the heavens from invading the half-realm, Ying Chuanqiu was still standing guard here. Qing Qinzi was in charge of everything in the sect. If that weren't the case, Qing Qinzi would have been the one to go instead of Ran Xiushu. Ran Xiushu followed the aura and quickly arrived in front of Ying Chuanqiu's platform. After bowing to her master, she told him everything that had happened. Ying Chuanqiu listened and thought for a long time. Then he said in a deep voice, our Shaoqing sect doesn't have many people, and we have a base on the Kunshe continent. We don't lack external objects or spiritual opportunity. It doesn't matter if we have one more or one less place. After a pause, he said in a more serious tone, it's just that this place is very likely to have been passed down by the patriarch, and it's possible that there are some things left behind by the patriarch. Disciple, take my jade talisman back to the sect and gather everyone. As long as you can get this place back, you can do whatever you want. Chapter 2102. Ran Xiushu and Tian Kun's auras suddenly disappeared, and the cultivators on Mount Sharp Moon immediately sensed it. After Gourd Shangzhen reacted, he was also bewildered. He immediately ordered people to search everywhere, but they could not find the two of them after searching everywhere. He also found the cultivator with the surname Qi and asked him repeatedly, but he could not confirm where they went. Some people below thought that the two of them had been trying to find out about the heaven and earth door ever since they arrived. Perhaps there was a hidden heaven and earth door that they did not know about, and the two of them escaped through it. However, this could not calm everyone down. Did the two of them really leave? Or did they leave temporarily? Even if they left, would there be a way to find the sword immortals who left? It was hard to know. Only one of them thought to himself, the two of them might have heard my suggestion and left this place long ago. That's good too. We can keep the place we live in, and we don't have to get into conflict with them. Gourd Shangzhen did not know about this. After discussing with everyone, he could only hope that Ran Xiushu and Tian Kun had really left this place, and did not return. However, there was still a sense of oppression in his chest that he could not get rid of. Thus, he still passed down orders to activate all the formations and restrictions, and increase their vigilance to prevent the worst situation. These formations were set up to resist the flying swords back then, but even they were not sure how effective they could be, so they were only temporarily comforted. After Tian Kun parted with Ran Xiushu, he broke through the heaven and earth and went straight to Qinghuan Palace. After entering the palace and bowing, he reported what he saw to his teacher. After hearing that, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You still have my decree in your hand. If the Shaoqing fellow Taoists want to go there later, you can open the door. After that, you don't have to care about it anymore." Tian Kun bowed in acknowledgement. After another salute, he retreated. Zhang Yan was intrigued. He instantly scanned the world, but he could not find the whereabouts of the Shaoqing seniors. It could be seen that they were no longer in this world. The 4 regions arranged by the great underworld founding master were also not in the same place, so these people might have gone to other places of fortune. However, if this was not arranged by the Shaoqing founding master, then they might have entered the main world where there was no place of fortune. If that was the case, it was almost impossible to find them again. However, this was Shaoqing's matter in the end. He would not interfere too much. As long as he was certain that there were no loopholes in this chaotic sky that could be exploited by outsiders, then it would be fine. After this chaotic sky, the remaining chaotic skies would also descend one after another. He would first dispel the strange power that was easy to expel. As for those that were difficult to deal with, he could ignore them for now. However, if there were any unusual movements, he would think of a way to deal with it. He looked into the silence again. Based on the fluctuations of magic power, it was not difficult to determine that Zhizhuang Daoren had already sent a few people to track the source of the spiritual opportunity. They should have deduced the exact location. However, the spiritual opportunity of all worlds was still rising at a steady pace, which meant that it was not the time for them to get what they wanted. Ran Xiushu left the half-world with Ing Chuanxiu's decree. When he returned to the sect, he first went to see Qing Qinzi and told him what had happened. He also presented the decree that Ing Chuanxiu had given him. Qing Qinzi made a prompt decision and said, "The place of inheritance of the founding master is not to be taken by outsiders. We must take it back." He instructed the disciple beside him, "Go and find junior brother Sun." Not long after, a cold sword chi floated outside the hall. Sun Huaying walked in and bowed, "Greetings, senior brothers." After greeting him, Ran Xiushu briefly explained what had happened. Qing Qinzi said in a deep voice, "Since we know about this, we must settle it quickly. The 3 of us will set off now and take back this place." Ran Xiushu said, "Should we inform Jinren-lo?" Qing Qinzi said calmly, "There is no need to alarm Jinren-lo. If something happens to Elder Ing, we will need Jinren Li's support. Moreover, the sect cannot be left unguarded. Just the 3 of us will do." He knew very well that if Taoist Master Lu went there, then no matter what happened, there would only be one result. The people of that world would be killed, and it would be hard to say how much of that world would be preserved. Ing Chuanxiu's decree was actually for the 3 of them to handle this matter. Sun Huaying said, "According to senior brother Ran's description, the 3 of us will be enough. If we can encounter a strong enemy, it is also our wish." Once the 3 of them made up their minds, they left the Western Forbidden Region together and headed towards the direction of the Yizang sect. Because the Muddy Heaven was only close to the Busu Heaven, it was not really connected yet, so they still needed the help of Zhang Yan's mana to get there. Of course, if they were still above the 9 continents, there was no need to do so. They could just use the decree left by the Patriarch to go there. However, before they could get far, a beam of yellow light descended and Tian Kun appeared in front of the 3 of them. He cupped his hands and said, "I've been waiting for you here under my master's orders. I've specially opened the door to the 2 worlds for your sect." Qing Qinzi bowed back and said, "Thank you for your help." Tian Kun raised his hand and threw the decree. Immediately, a spiritual light screen unfolded. After Qing Qinzi and the others thanked him, they passed through without hesitation. In just a blink of an eye, they were already in another world. Qing Qinzi's mind moved and the spiritual light turned back into a decree. It flew in front of him and he couldn't help but nod. He rolled up his sleeve and kept it. Then, he sensed the location of the sword qi and said, "Let's go find the cave abodes left behind by the ancestors and see if we can find any clues. It won't be too late to find these people after we've sorted out the matter here." Even though directly annihilating all the people in the divine realm who had seized control of the divine realm was the most direct and efficient method, as the successor of the sect master, he wouldn't do things in such a straightforward manner, nor would he listen to Ranxiushu's words just because he was his junior brother. Among the Shaoqing's 3 lineages, the people of the extreme sword lineage were the most carefree, and their actions were the most unrestrained. The people of the killing sword lineage abandoned all distractions, and only focused on the sword. Only the people who practiced sword transformation had the deepest and most complicated thoughts, so the authority of the Shaoqing sects was usually controlled by this lineage. Reality proved that the people of this lineage could indeed bear heavy responsibilities. Now that Qing Qinzi said so, Ranxiushu and Sun Huaying had no objections. Thus, they didn't care about the cultivators here and went straight to where the sword qi was. Because the target couldn't be clearer, the 3 of them arrived in a flash. However, they found that there were layers of formation surrounding the place where the sword qi was hidden. However, this place was set up just now after Ranxiushu came. It wasn't used to attack or defend, but to seal, so there wasn't much resistance. Qing Qinzi calculated and knew the truth of this place. He said, "Junior apprentice brother Sun, cut this place open." Sun Huaying took a few steps forward and looked at the formation in front of her. She raised her finger and pointed. In an instant, the sword light flashed and the heaven and earth dimmed. When they looked again, they saw that the whole formation had been cut open. Not only was the spiritual vigor in it destroyed, everything in the place where the sword mark had passed was destroyed and nothing was left. Ranxiushu sighed and said, "Junior apprentice brother Sun's swordsmanship has become more powerful." He then secretly rejoiced, "Luckily I didn't call Uncle Master Lu over this time." Once the formation was gone, the sword qi that was originally hidden inside became clear. The sword pellets that the 3 of them held faintly resonated with each other. Qing Qinzi said, "We'll talk after we go in." In a flash, the 3 of them entered the hall. They saw 3 strands of sword qi hanging above. One was extremely sharp, one had endless changes, and the last was like a flowing light. It was as if it had its own spirituality and was wandering around. However, it seemed to be restricted by something and couldn't leave the hall. As the 3 of them looked over, countless scenes instantly floated past their eyes. They discovered that these were the sword technique comprehensions that the senior had left here. The 3 strands of sword qi each represented a lineage of sword inheritance. However, the 3 of them didn't accept all of them after looking at them. This was because they all believed that cultivation was their own matter. The comprehensions of the predecessors belonged to the predecessors and could be referenced. However, there was no need for them to believe too much. Even if there were some parts that they couldn't understand, they deeply believed that it wouldn't be difficult for them to comprehend the profundities within with their own cultivation and accumulation. Not only did the sword qi contain cultivation comprehensions, but it also explained the whereabouts of the Shaoqing cultivators here. After these Shaoqing seniors severed their past and future, they could no longer find the path to the upper realm. Thus, they followed a talisman left behind by the founding master and went elsewhere to search for opportunities to break through. At this moment, Qing Qinzi's expression gradually became solemn. This was because it wasn't difficult for him to tell from the information that these seniors had disciples left behind, and there were quite a few of them. Where exactly did these people go? If it was said that Moon Rhino Mountain had killed these cultivators, it wouldn't be to this extent. After all, judging from the way these seniors did things, they didn't dare to go too far. No matter what, these were disciples of the Shaoqing lineage. They had to ask the cultivators of Moon Rhino Mountain. It must be known that back in the 9 continents, the official disciples of the Shaoqing lineage only numbered 100 or so. Now that they were in the mountain and sea realm, because they didn't lack external objects, their numbers had increased by more than 10 times. However, there were still nearly 2,000 people. Although all of them could be called outstanding, there were still too few of them. If they could find the disciples of this realm, they might be able to strengthen the sect. The three of them were here to investigate the cave abode of the seniors. Little did they know that their arrival had already caused the cultivators of Moon Rhino Mountain to panic. What made them even more uneasy was that from what they knew, once disciples of the minor clear lineage ascended to this place, they would no longer have any connection with the sect behind them. However, from the looks of it now, that was not the case. Someone said in panic, "There are a total of 3 sword immortals who came this time, and they seem to have discovered the cave abode that we sealed." "Gorge Shungjin, what should we do?" Gorge Shungjin said calmly, "There's no need to panic. These 3 haven't even waved their swords at me, so why should I panic? Let's first ask them why they're here, then make a decision." He called over a fellow disciple he was on good terms with and said, "Lai Shungjin, you stay here and take control of the core of the formation. I'll personally go meet with these people."